The boardroom doors exploded open at exactly 9:47 p.m. on a Saturday night. Ivy Langford stood in the entrance wearing a borrowed evening gown, her hair still pinned from a party she'd abandoned mid-toast, flanked by a man in mechanic's coveralls who had grease still visible under his fingernails. Across the polished mahogany table, 12 board members froze mid-argument, their faces draining of color as they recognized the young woman they'd just voted to remove as CEO. "I believe," Ivy said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade, "you gentlemen started this meeting without me." But this story doesn't begin in that boardroom. It begins 3 days earlier in a small auto repair shop on the south side of the city, where a stranger walked through the door and asked a question that would change everything. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city name in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're curious how a single father with motor oil on his hands ended up in a corporate war, hit that like button and stay with me until the end. Trust me, you won't see this one coming. The overhead fluorescent lights in Brooks Auto Repair flickered twice before settling into their usual steady hum. Daniel Brooks didn't look up from the engine he was working on, a 2006 Honda Civic with a timing belt that had seen better days. His hands moved with practiced precision, fingers finding bolts and connections in the dim space under the hood without needing to see them. After 12 years of working on cars, his body knew the rhythm of this work the way some people knew how to dance. "We're closing in 10 minutes, he called out, assuming whoever had triggered the door chime was another last-minute customer hoping to squeeze in a quick oil change. Saturday nights were supposed to be quiet. Most people were out enjoying their weekends, not thinking about their transmission problems. "I'm not here for car repair." Daniel's hand stilled. The voice was female, young, and carried an odd mixture of nervousness and determination that made him finally look up. She stood just inside the doorway, backlit by the streetlights outside, seeming uncertain whether to step further into the garage. Mid-20s, maybe. She wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, nothing remarkable about the clothes themselves, but something in the way she held herself suggested she wasn't used to wearing them. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a small leather bag across her shoulder. Her eyes, even from across the garage, were searching and intelligent. "Then you're in the wrong place," Daniel said, not unkindly. He wiped his hands on the red shop rag that perpetually hung from his back pocket and moved around the front of the Civic. "This is an auto shop. If you're looking for the pharmacy or the convenience store, they're 2 blocks east." "I know what this place is." She took a step forward, and the overhead lights caught her face more clearly. Pretty, in an understated way, with dark eyes that seemed older than the rest of her. "I'm looking for you. Daniel Brooks, right?" Every instinct Daniel had developed as both a mechanic and a single father suddenly went on alert. He'd learned to read people over the years, learned to spot the customers who would try to skip out on their bills, learned to identify which problems people brought into his shop were about their cars and which were about their lives. This woman was bringing him something, and it wasn't about engine trouble. "Who's asking?" He kept his voice neutral, professional. His phone was in his pocket. The garage had cameras. He was probably being paranoid, but paranoia had kept him and his daughter safe for the past 8 years. "My name is Ivy." She seemed to make a decision and cross the remaining distance between them, her steps quick and purposeful now that she'd committed. "Ivy Langford, and I know this is going to sound absolutely insane, but I need to ask you for help with something unusual." "I don't do loans," Daniel said immediately, "and I'm not interested in any business opportunities or investment schemes. If that's what this is about, you should leave." "It's not about money." Ivy stopped a few feet away from him, close enough that he could see the fine tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the strap of her bag. "I need you to pretend to be my boyfriend for a weekend." The words hung in the air between them for a long moment. Daniel blinked. Then, despite everything, he felt a laugh building in his chest. "Okay, which one of the guys put you up to this? Was it Marco? He's always trying to—" "Nobody put me up to anything." Ivy's voice was steady, serious. "I'm asking you for real. I need a date for this weekend, someone to attend a family event with me and act like we're together. I'll pay you for your time, of course. Whatever rate seems fair." Daniel's amusement evaporated. "You're serious?" "Completely serious." And you just walked into a random auto shop to ask a complete stranger to be your fake boyfriend. Daniel crossed his arms over his chest, the shop rag still dangling from one hand. Do you have any idea how that sounds? I know exactly how it sounds. For the first time, something like frustration cracked through Ivy's composed exterior. But you're not a complete stranger. I've been watching this shop for 3 weeks. That should have alarmed him. Instead, Daniel found himself curious. Why? Because I needed someone specific. Ivy set her bag down on the workbench beside them, a gesture that seemed designed to show she wasn't planning to run. I needed someone who was steady, responsible, normal. Someone who wouldn't try to take advantage of the situation or make it complicated. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, you close this shop at exactly 8:30. You go to the elementary school and pick up a little girl, your daughter, I assume. You drive her home to an apartment 3 miles from here. You work honest hours, pay your bills on time, and from everything I can tell, you're exactly the kind of person I need for this. Daniel's hands had clenched into fists without him realizing it. You've been following my daughter? No. Ivy's eyes went wide, and she held up both hands in a gesture of surrender. God, no. I would never. I ran a background check, that's all. Standard public records search. I wasn't stalking you. I was just making sure you were who I thought you were. And who did you think I was? Someone trustworthy. Ivy's voice softened. Someone who wouldn't judge me or try to use what they learned about me. Someone who would just help if I asked. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, trying to reconcile the absurdity of what was happening with the genuine desperation he could see in this woman's eyes. Every rational part of his brain was screaming at him to send her away, to close up the shop and go home to his daughter and forget this ever happened. But there was something else there too. Something in the way Ivy held herself, in the careful control of her voice, in the fact that she'd come here alone on a Saturday night to ask a stranger for help. He'd seen that kind of desperation before, usually in people who'd run out of other options. Why me? He asked quietly. You've got money, clearly, enough to run background checks and hire investigators and whatever else you did. Why not hire an escort service or ask a friend, or find literally any other solution than walking into a stranger's garage? Because I can't trust my friends. The words came out harsh, bitter. And I can't hire someone from the usual channels because this situation requires discretion. I need someone who exists completely outside my normal world. Someone who won't recognize the names involved or understand the stakes or care about any of it beyond doing what I'm paying them to do. What kind of family event needs that level of secrecy? Ivy hesitated, and Daniel could see her weighing how much to reveal. An engagement party. My cousin is getting married, and the family expects me to bring a date. If I show up alone, there will be questions, assumptions, pressure. I just need someone to stand beside me for one weekend and help me avoid all of that. So bring an actual boyfriend. I don't have one. Then don't go. I have to. Ivy's jaw tightened. I can't explain why without explaining everything, and I'm not ready to do that. But please believe me when I say that my presence at this event is not optional, and showing up with someone appropriate beside me will make everything significantly easier. Daniel turned away from her, moving back toward the Civic he'd been working on. His hands found the hood, lowered it carefully into place. He'd learned over the years that sometimes people needed a moment of silence to either come clean or leave. He waited to see which Ivy would choose. My father died 6 months ago. Her voice was quiet enough that Daniel almost missed it over the ambient sounds of the garage. He turned back around. Ivy was looking down at her hands, her fingers twisted together. He was sick for a long time, and then he was gone, and suddenly everything in my life became complicated in ways I wasn't prepared for. This party, it's the first major family gathering since the funeral. Everyone will be watching me, judging how I'm handling things, making assessments about my stability and my judgment and my future. I'm sorry for your loss, Daniel said, and meant it. He understood that particular kind of grief, the weight of being left behind. But I still don't understand why you need a fake boyfriend to deal with it. Well, because if I show up alone, my family will assume I'm not coping. They'll assume I'm isolated and vulnerable and in need of intervention. Ivy looked up, and her eyes were fierce now, burning with something Daniel recognized as pride. They'll use it as evidence that I'm not capable of managing my own life. let alone any of the responsibilities my father left me. But if I show up with someone stable and normal and completely unremarkable, it proves I'm fine, that my life is moving forward, that they don't need to worry or interfere or make decisions on my behalf. Now they were getting somewhere. Daniel leaned back against the workbench, studying her. What kind of responsibilities are we talking about? The kind that come with inherited wealth and family expectations. Ivy's voice had gone flat, careful. The kind that make people very interested in whether you're mentally and emotionally stable enough to handle your own affairs. How much wealth? Enough that this weekend matters. Daniel absorbed that. He thought about his own life, the modest apartment, the garage that barely broke even most months, the constant juggling of bills and childcare and making sure his daughter had what she needed. Enough wealth that one weekend could make a difference. He couldn't even imagine that kind of money. I have a daughter, he said finally. She's 8 years old. She's in 3rd grade. She likes basketball and science experiments, and she's afraid of thunderstorms. If I do this, if I even consider doing this, I need to know that nothing you're involved in is going to come back and affect her. It won't. Ivy's response was immediate and absolute. I would never let that happen. This is just theater, Daniel. You show up, you smile, you make small talk at a party, and then you go home. Your life doesn't change. Your daughter never even knows it happened. Kids are smarter than you think. Then tell her you're helping out a friend for the weekend. Ivy took a step forward, her earlier nervousness replaced by something more focused. Tell her whatever you need to tell her, but please, Daniel, I know this is bizarre, and I know I have no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. Help me get through this weekend, and I promise you'll be compensated fairly for your time. How fairly? $20,000. Daniel's breath caught. $20,000. That was 6 months of revenue for the garage. That was his daughter's college fund doubled. That was breathing room he hadn't had in years. For one weekend, he said slowly, pretending to be your boyfriend at a family party. Friday evening through Sunday afternoon. Less than 48 hours of your time. And all I have to do is stand next to you and act like we're together. That's all. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her this time, trying to see past the careful presentation to whatever was driving this request. What he saw was exhaustion and determination in equal measure, and something else that reminded him of the way he'd felt when his daughter was born and his wife left, and he'd realized he was completely alone with responsibilities he had no idea how to handle. I need to think about it, he said. Ivy nodded. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, plain white, just a phone number printed in black ink. That's my personal cell. Call me by tomorrow night if you're interested. If I don't hear from you, I'll understand. She turned to leave, and Daniel found himself speaking before he'd decided to. What happens if you show up alone? Ivy paused in the doorway, her back still to him. Then people who have been waiting for me to fail will get what they've been waiting for. And I'll spend the next several years fighting battles I'm not sure I can win. And if I come with you? Then maybe I buy myself enough time to figure out how to fight them properly. She looked back over her shoulder, and for just a moment the careful control slipped, and he saw something raw and real underneath. I'm not a damsel in distress, Daniel. I'm just someone who's trying to survive a situation that's bigger than I expected, and I'm asking for help the only way I know how. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness outside, leaving only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the business card sitting on his workbench. Daniel stood alone in his garage for a long time after that, staring at the white rectangle of cardstock and thinking about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then he thought about his daughter's smile when he told her they might be able to afford that science camp she wanted to attend next summer. He thought about the leak in the garage roof he'd been putting off fixing for 3 months. He thought about the weight of trying to build a life on a mechanic's salary in a city that got more expensive every year. And he thought about the look in Ivy Langford's eyes, that mixture of pride and desperation that he recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror more times than he wanted to count. He picked up the business card and slipped it into his wallet. Oh, Sunday morning arrived with the sound of his daughter's footsteps thundering down the hallway toward his bedroom. Daniel had exactly 3 seconds of warning before she launched herself onto his bed, landing with enough force to make the frame creak. Dad, wake up! You promised we could make pancakes." "I'm awake," Daniel mumbled into his pillow, though this was only partially true. "I've been awake since you started running from your room." "Then why are you still in bed?" Emma Brooks, 8 years old and constitutionally incapable of moving at any speed slower than a sprint, bounced on the mattress until Daniel finally surrendered and sat up. Because some people enjoy sleeping in on Sunday mornings. Boring people. Emma grinned at him, her dark curls tangling around her face in the wild chaos that happened when she slept. She had her mother's hair and her mother's smile, but thankfully that was where the resemblance ended. Everything else, the stubborn determination, the bright curiosity, the absolute certainty that the world was a place full of interesting problems waiting to be solved, that was all Emma. "You're lucky you're cute," Daniel said, ruffling her hair and earning a shriek of protest. "Come on, pancake monster, let's see what we can do." The apartment they shared was small but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely large enough for one person to cook in, a living room that served as Emma's play space and Daniel's office, and their shared everything else area. They'd lived here for 6 years, ever since Daniel had saved up enough for the security deposit and first month's rent. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Emma chattered continuously as Daniel mixed pancake batter, telling him about the book she was reading and the experiment her science teacher had shown them on Friday, and how her friend Madison had a new bike that was purple with sparkles. Daniel made appropriate sounds of interest while his mind wandered to other things, to a business card in his wallet, to a stranger's desperate request, to $20,000. Dad, you're not listening." Daniel blinked and looked down at his daughter, who was staring up at him with her hands on her hips in her best impression of a disappointed parent. "Sorry, Em, what did you say?" "I asked if we could go to the park after breakfast. It's sunny out, and Katie said she might be there, and I want to try the monkey bars again." "Sure, kiddo, park sounds good." They ate pancakes at their small kitchen table while Emma continued her running commentary on life, the universe, and everything she'd observed in the past 48 hours. Daniel listened with half his attention while the other half circled back to the same questions he'd been asking himself since Ivy Langford walked out of his garage. Was this legitimate? It sounded insane, but the money she'd offered wasn't insane. $20,000 for a weekend was either the deal of a lifetime or evidence that something was seriously wrong. Could he trust her? He didn't know her. She'd admitted to running a background check on him, which was both alarming and somehow reassuring in its directness. At least she'd been honest about it. What were the risks? That was the part that kept nagging at him. She'd said his life wouldn't change, that his daughter would never be affected. But was that realistic? If this woman had enough money to casually offer $20,000 for a weekend of his time, she was moving in circles Daniel couldn't even imagine. What if there were consequences he couldn't predict? But then again, $20,000. Dad, you're doing it again. Doing what? Thinking really loud. Emma pointed her fork at him accusingly. Your face gets all scrunchy when you're thinking loud. Daniel forced himself to smile. Sorry, I've got some stuff on my mind. Work stuff? Sort of. Is the garage okay? Emma's expression shifted to something more serious. She was 8 years old, but she paid attention to things. She knew when money was tight, when bills were overdue, when Daniel was stressed about keeping their small operation afloat. The garage is fine, Daniel assured her. I'm just thinking about maybe taking on some extra work for a few days. What kind of work? Good question. Helping someone with a project. It would mean being gone for a weekend, but it pays really well. Emma considered this while methodically destroying her pancakes into smaller and smaller pieces. Would I have to stay with Mrs. Peterson? Mrs. Peterson was their neighbor, a retired teacher who occasionally watched Emma when Daniel had to work late. Emma liked her well enough, but she preferred being home. Probably, or maybe your Uncle Marco could come stay with you. Marco wasn't actually Emma's uncle, but he'd been Daniel's best friend since high school and was a fixture in their lives. Emma adored him. Uncle Marco lets me stay up late. That's because Uncle Marco has no sense of responsibility. He says responsibility is for people who are boring. Uncle Marco would say that. Daniel reached across the table and stole a piece of Emma's demolished pancake. So you'd be okay if I took this extra work? Emma shrugged. I guess, as long as you come back. The casual way she said it hit Daniel harder than it should have. She was 8. She shouldn't have to worry about people coming back. But her mother had left when she was 3 months old, and even though Emma had no conscious memory of it, some part of her had apparently internalized the lesson that people could disappear. "I would always come back," Daniel said quietly. "You know that, right? No matter what, I would always come back to you." "I know, Dad." Emma rolled her eyes in the way only an 8-year-old could. "Can we go to the park now? You're getting all mushy." They spent the afternoon at the park, where Emma attacked the monkey bars with single-minded determination while Daniel sat on a bench and tried to imagine what Ivy Langford's life was like. What kind of family gathering required hiring a fake boyfriend? What kind of wealth came with strings so complicated that showing up alone to a party counted as failure? He pulled out his phone 3 times before finally opening his contacts and staring at the number he'd entered last night. Ivy Langford, personal cell. Call by tomorrow night. Tomorrow was running out. It was already 4 in the afternoon. If he was going to do this, he needed to decide now. "Emma," he called out, 5 more minutes, then we need to head home." "Oh, Dad." 5 minutes. I need to make a phone call." He walked to the far side of the playground where he could still see Emma, but had enough distance for privacy. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he dialed the number. Ivy answered on the second ring. "Hello? It's Daniel Brooks from the garage." "Daniel?" He could hear the relief in her voice. "I wasn't sure I'd hear from you." "I've been thinking about your offer." "And?" Daniel watched his daughter swing from bar to bar, her face scrunched up in concentration, her small body strong and determined. "I need to know more. Not about you. I don't care about your personal life or your family drama, but I need to know exactly what you're expecting from me and what the risks are. Because if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to take your money and play along with whatever this is, I need to know that my daughter stays completely out of it." "She will," Ivy said immediately. "I promise you, Daniel, your daughter won't be affected. This weekend is about me managing my family's expectations, nothing more. You show up, you act like a normal boyfriend, you help me deflect some uncomfortable questions, and then you go home. That's it. And the party? What should I expect? A formal event at my family's estate, cocktail attire, probably 100 guests, lots of small talk and social posturing. You'll need to rent a suit if you don't own one. I'll cover the cost. I'll brief you on the basic family dynamics and give you enough background that you can hold a conversation without raising suspicions." "Your family's estate," Daniel repeated. "How big are we talking?" "Big enough that you won't have trouble finding a quiet corner if things get overwhelming," which told him nothing and everything at the same time. "When would this happen?" "Next weekend, Friday evening through Sunday afternoon, like I said. I'd pick you up Friday at 6, and we'd drive to the estate together. You'd stay in the guest house with me. Separate rooms, of course. The party is Saturday evening. Sunday morning, we'd make an appearance at brunch, and then I'd drive you home." "Guest house." Daniel rubbed his hand across his face. "Separate rooms, cocktail attire. This is insane." "But you're considering it." He was. God help him. He was actually considering it. $20,000, cash, half up front. "Agreed. And I need you to understand something." Daniel's voice went hard. "I'm not doing this because I need your charity or because I think you're someone important. I'm doing this because that money represents security for my daughter, and I will do a lot of things to give her a better life. But if at any point this weekend puts her at risk or crosses a line I'm not comfortable with, I'm walking away. Money or no money." "That's fair," Ivy said quietly. "And for what it's worth, Daniel, I respect that. Your daughter is lucky to have someone who protects her that fiercely. When do you need my final answer?" "Tonight, if possible. I need time to prepare if you're coming." Daniel looked across the playground at Emma, who had finally conquered the monkey bars and was now hanging upside down from her knees, her face red with exertion and triumph. $20,000. College fund. New equipment for the garage, breathing room. 1 weekend of pretending to be someone he wasn't. "Okay," he said. "I'm in." The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation and second-guessing. Ivy had been true to her word. $10,000 appeared in Daniel's account Monday morning, transferred from a corporate account he didn't recognize. She'd also sent over a detailed schedule for the weekend and the address of a formal wear rental shop where she'd already arranged for him to be fitted for a suit. This is insane, Marco said Wednesday evening, leaning against the garage workbench while Daniel finished up an oil change. You know that, right? This whole thing is completely insane. You've mentioned that. Daniel had told Marco about the arrangement partly because he needed someone to watch Emma, and partly because Marco was the closest thing he had to family. If this went sideways, someone needed to know where he'd gone. 20 grand to be some rich lady's arm candy for a weekend. It's like something out of a movie. Marco shook his head. What if she's a serial killer? What if this whole thing is a setup and you end up chopped into pieces in her basement? She doesn't strike me as the serial killer type. That's what all the victims say right before they get murdered. You're being dramatic. I'm being realistic. Marco crossed his arms over his chest. You don't know this woman, Danny. You don't know what you're walking into. I know she's desperate enough to pay $20,000 for help, and I know that money could change things for me and Emma. Money's not worth dying for. Nobody's dying. Daniel lowered the hood on the car he'd been working on and wiped his hands clean. It's a party, Marco. Rich people standing around drinking expensive wine and making small talk. I can handle that for 48 hours. And what are you telling Emma? That question had been bothering Daniel all week. The truth, mostly, that I'm helping someone with a project and I'll be gone for the weekend. She doesn't need to know the details. Kids are smart. She's going to ask questions. Then I'll answer what I can and deflect the rest. Daniel tossed the shop rag aside and turned to face his friend directly. Look, I appreciate you worrying about me, but I've thought this through. I've weighed the risks, and I've decided it's worth it. Marco studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Fine, but I'm staying at your place with Emma all weekend, and if you don't call me every 12 hours to check in, I'm calling the cops. Deal. Thursday night, Daniel tried on the suit Ivy had arranged for him to rent. It fit perfectly. Dark charcoal gray, crisp white shirt, burgundy tie that probably cost more than his usual wardrobe combined. He stared at himself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. Dad, can I come in? Daniel opened the door to find Emma standing in the hallway, already in her pajamas, her eyes going wide when she saw him. Whoa, you look fancy. I feel ridiculous. You look like a secret agent. Emma circled around him, examining the suit from all angles. Are you going to a wedding? Something like that. Daniel crouched down to her level. Remember how I told you I'd be gone this weekend? To help with a project. Right. Well, this is part of it. I'm going to a fancy party, and I need to look the part. Emma reached out and straightened his tie with the solemnity of someone performing an important task. Will there be cake? Probably. You should bring me some. I'll see what I can do. Daniel pulled her into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. You're okay with Uncle Marco staying here? Yep. He promised we could build a blanket fort. Of course he did. Daniel held her a moment longer, feeling the familiar weight of being her entire world. I love you, Em. Love you too, Dad. You really do look nice. Friday evening arrived too quickly. Daniel had spent the day at the garage trying to focus on work and failing miserably. When 5:30 rolled around, he closed up early and headed home to shower and change. By the time 6 o'clock came, he was standing in his apartment wearing the rented suit and feeling like an imposter. Marco had already arrived with a bag of snacks and a stack of movies. Emma was delighted. Daniel was anxious. You've got this, Marco said quietly, while Emma was distracted setting up the first movie. Just be yourself. Well, yourself, but with better clothes. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Any time. The knock on the door came at exactly 6 o'clock. Daniel took a breath, checked his appearance one final time in the hallway mirror, and opened the door. Ivy Langford stood in the hallway wearing a simple black dress and heels, her hair down around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the practical ponytail she'd worn to the garage. She looked polished, expensive, and completely out of place in his building's worn hallway. Daniel! Her eyes swept over him and something like relief crossed her face. You look perfect. I look uncomfortable. That too. A small smile. Are you ready? As ready as I'm going to be. He grabbed his overnight bag. Marco had helped him pack, insisting he bring at least 2 changes of casual clothes in addition to the suit, and turned to find Emma standing in the living room doorway, studying Ivy with open curiosity. "Emma, this is my friend Ivy. Ivy, this is my daughter Emma." "Hi," Emma said, with the directness of children everywhere. "You're pretty." "Thank you." Ivy's smile softened. "You must be very smart if you're Daniel's daughter." "I'm in advanced math," Emma said proudly, "and I'm going to be a scientist when I grow up." "That's wonderful. The world needs more scientists." Emma seemed satisfied with this response. She turned to Daniel and gave him a hug that was tighter than usual. "Bye, Dad. Have fun at your fancy party." "I'll be back Sunday," Daniel promised. "Be good for Uncle Marco." "I'm always good," Marco snorted from the living room. Daniel shot him a look, then followed Ivy out into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind him. The car waiting at the curb was not what Daniel expected. It was a sleek black sedan, expensive but not ostentatious, with tinted windows and an engine that purred rather than roared. Ivy opened the driver's side door and slid in, waiting for him to join her. "You drove yourself," Daniel observed. "I prefer it." Ivy started the engine and pulled smoothly into traffic. "Gives me control over my schedule and my privacy." They drove in silence for several minutes, leaving Daniel's neighborhood behind and heading toward the highway. Daniel watched the city slide past his window and tried to calm his nerves. "You can still back out," Ivy said quietly. "If you've changed your mind, I'll turn around right now. You can keep the 10,000. No questions asked." "I haven't changed my mind." "You look tense." "I'm driving to a stranger's family estate to pretend to be her boyfriend for a weekend. Tense seems appropriate." Ivy's mouth twitched. "Fair point. For what it's worth, I'm tense too." "You hide it better." Years of practice. She merged onto the highway, accelerating smoothly. "I should brief you on what to expect. Basic family dynamics, potential conversational landmines, that sort of thing." "I'm listening." "My family is—" Ivy paused, choosing her words carefully. "Complicated. Old money, which comes with certain expectations about behavior and propriety. My father was the youngest of 3 siblings. His older brother Thomas is the current family patriarch. Then there's my Aunt Caroline, who fancies herself the family's moral authority." "And your cousin who's getting engaged?" "Victoria, Thomas's daughter. She's marrying someone appropriately wealthy and appropriately boring. The party is really just an excuse for the family to gather and assess each other's lives." "Sounds delightful." "It's exactly as terrible as it sounds." Ivy's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "But it's also mandatory, at least for me. My father's death shifted certain dynamics in the family, and there are people watching very carefully to see how I handle things." "What kind of things?" Ivy was quiet for a moment. "My father left me certain responsibilities when he died. Important ones. There are family members who believe I'm not capable of handling them, and they're looking for any excuse to prove their point. And showing up with a boyfriend proves you're handling things? It proves I have a normal personal life, that I'm stable, that I'm not so consumed by grief or responsibility that I've isolated myself." Ivy glanced at him briefly. "I know it seems manipulative and artificial, and it is, but that's how my family works. Appearances matter. Perception is reality." Daniel thought about his own family, or rather, the lack thereof. His parents were gone, his wife was gone. He had no siblings and few relatives who bothered to stay in touch. His family was Emma and Marco, and the small community he'd built around his garage. The idea of navigating complex social dynamics and managing appearances for dozens of relatives seemed exhausting. "What do I need to know about you?" he asked. "If I'm supposed to be your boyfriend, I should probably know more than your name and the fact that you run background checks on mechanics." "That's fair." Ivy seemed to relax slightly, as if she'd been waiting for him to ask. "I'm 26. I graduated from Columbia with a degree in business management. I like classical music and old movies, and I'm terrible at sports. I drink too much coffee, and I'm mildly allergic to shellfish. I've lived in New York my whole life except for college. She paused. "I'm not very good at relationships, which is why I had to hire someone for this." "Not good how?" "I prioritize work over personal connections. I have trust issues. I tend to keep people at a distance because it's easier than explaining my life. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was listing the features of a car. My father and I were close. He understood me. Since he died, I felt very alone in a room full of relatives. Daniel understood that feeling more than she probably knew. I'm sorry. That sounds hard. It is what it is. Ivy's voice had gone carefully neutral again. What about you? What should I know? Not much to tell. I'm 30. I've been a mechanic since I was 18. Emma's mom left when she was a baby, so it's been just the two of us for the past 8 years. I don't date much, no time, and most people aren't interested in taking on someone else's kid. I like fixing things. I'm good at it, and I'm doing my best to give my daughter a stable life. You're doing better than just your best, Ivy said quietly. Emma is clearly happy and well-adjusted. That says a lot about you as a father. The compliment caught Daniel off guard. Thanks. They drove for another hour, leaving the city far behind and entering countryside that grew progressively more manicured and wealthy. Large estates appeared behind stone walls and iron gates. Private roads disappeared into wooded properties. This was a world Daniel had only ever seen in movies. We're almost there, Ivy said as they turned onto a private road marked only with a discreet sign that read Langford. The main house is where the party will be tomorrow night. We'll be staying in the guest house, which is about a quarter mile from the main property. It has 2 bedrooms and a kitchen. You'll have complete privacy. How big is this place? 200 acres. Most of it is woods and gardens. The main house is about 12,000 square feet. Daniel whistled low. And your family just owns this? As like a weekend place? It's been in the family for 4 generations. Ivy said it like it was normal, which Daniel supposed for her it was. My grandfather expanded it significantly in the 60s. Now it mostly gets used for events like this. The car rounded a curve and the main house came into view through the trees. It was massive, stone and glass and architectural details that suggested more money than Daniel had ever imagined in one place. Lights glowed in some of the windows. Other cars were parked in the circular drive. People are already arriving, Ivy noted, her voice tightening. We should go straight to the guest house. She drove past the main house and down a smaller road that wound through perfectly maintained grounds. The guest house, when it appeared, was still larger than any place Daniel had ever lived. It was designed in the same style as the main house, all stone and large windows, with a wraparound porch and mature trees providing privacy. Ivy parked and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. Last chance, she said quietly. Once we walk through those doors, you're committed to this weekend. Are you sure? Daniel thought about Emma, about the 10,000 already in his account and the 10,000 waiting at the end of this. He thought about the look in Ivy's eyes that night in his garage, that combination of pride and desperation that had made him say yes in the first place. I'm sure, he said. Let's do this. They got out of the car, and Daniel grabbed his bag from the trunk. Ivy led the way up the porch steps and unlocked the front door, gesturing for him to enter first. The interior was beautiful, hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, a kitchen that was probably larger than Daniel's entire apartment. Large windows looked out onto the darkened woods. Everything was expensive without being ostentatious, comfortable without being casual. Your room is upstairs, first door on the left, Ivy said, setting her own bag down by the stairs. There are fresh towels in the bathroom. Make yourself comfortable. I'll make us some dinner and we can go over tomorrow's schedule. Daniel climbed the stairs and found his room. Large bed, private bathroom, closet bigger than Emma's entire bedroom. He set his bag down and stood at the window, looking out at the darkened estate grounds and wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Downstairs, he could hear Ivy moving around the kitchen, the clink of dishes and the sound of the refrigerator opening and closing. Normal sounds. Domestic sounds. He touched the business card that was still in his wallet, the one with just a phone number printed in black ink. Whatever happened this weekend, at least he'd taken the leap. At least he'd tried. The weekend had officially begun. Dinner was a simple affair. Pasta with marinara sauce that Ivy prepared while Daniel sat at the kitchen island and tried to pretend this was normal. She moved around the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew their way around food preparation, even if the kitchen itself probably cost more than Daniel's car. You cook, he observed. I do a lot of things people don't expect. Ivy stirred the sauce, tasting it with a wooden spoon before adding more garlic. My father believed self-sufficiency was important, regardless of how much money we had. He made sure I could take care of myself. Sounds like he was a good man. He was. Ivy's voice softened. Complicated, demanding, impossible sometimes. But good. He had very clear ideas about what it meant to be a Langford, and he made sure I understood the responsibility that came with the name. Daniel watched her work, noting the way her shoulders tensed when she mentioned her father. Grief was like that. It snuck up on you in ordinary moments, turned simple conversations into minefields. He knew that territory well. What did he do? For work, I mean. Ivy set down the spoon and turned to face him, leaning back against the counter. He ran several companies: manufacturing, real estate development, some tech investments. The Langford family made their money in textiles originally, back in the early 1900s, but my grandfather and father diversified significantly. Now the portfolio is complicated enough that it takes a team of accountants to manage it all. And that fell to you when he died? Some of it. Ivy's expression became guarded. The details aren't important. What matters is that my family is very interested in how I handle those responsibilities, and they're watching for any sign that I can't manage the pressure. Which is where I come in. Exactly. Ivy turned back to the stove, draining pasta with practiced ease. If I show up tomorrow with you beside me, looking stable and happy and normal, it diffuses a lot of potential criticism. It suggests I'm managing my personal life successfully, which by extension suggests I can manage everything else. That's a lot of weight to put on one fake relationship. Welcome to my world. Ivy plated the pasta and brought both dishes to the island, settling onto the stool across from Daniel. But that's my problem, not yours. All you need to do is smile, make small talk, and let people assume we're together. I'll handle the rest. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The pasta was excellent, the sauce rich with herbs and perfectly seasoned. Daniel tried to remember the last time someone had cooked for him and came up empty. Usually he was the one doing the cooking, making sure Emma ate something besides chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. Tell me about Emma's mother, Ivy said suddenly. You don't have to if it's too personal, but if people ask tomorrow, and they will ask, it helps if I know the real story. Daniel set down his fork, considering how much to share. Her name was Michelle. We met when we were young, got married too fast, had Emma before we were ready. Michelle struggled with postpartum depression after the birth, and instead of getting help, she just left. Walked out when Emma was 3 months old and never came back. I'm sorry. It was 8 years ago. I've made my peace with it. Daniel picked up his fork again, needing something to do with his hands. Emma asks about her sometimes. I tell her that her mom loved her but wasn't ready to be a parent, which is probably more generous than Michelle deserves, but feels like the right thing to say. You're protecting her. I'm giving her a story she can live with. Daniel met Ivy's eyes. The truth is her mother abandoned her, but what good does it do Emma to grow up believing she wasn't wanted? Better to think her mom made a difficult choice and move on. Ivy was quiet for a moment, studying him with an intensity that made Daniel uncomfortable. You're a better person than most people I know. I'm just a dad trying to do right by his kid. That's exactly what makes you better. Ivy pushed her plate aside and pulled a folder from her bag that was sitting on the counter. We should go over tomorrow's schedule and make sure you know what to expect. The folder contained a typed itinerary, a floor plan of the main house, and what appeared to be a family tree with small photos attached to each name. Daniel stared at the materials and felt his anxiety spike. This is very thorough, he said carefully. I don't leave things to chance. Ivy opened the folder and pointed to the schedule. Tomorrow we have brunch at 11, which is informal. Just family, maybe 30 people. You'll meet my Uncle Thomas, my Aunt Caroline, my cousin Victoria, and her fiancé. There will be questions about how we met, how long we've been together, that sort of thing. I've prepared answers for the most common ones. You've prepared answers? Stories we're both familiar with, yes. It's easier if we're consistent. Ivy pulled out a sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. We met 4 months ago when I brought my car into your garage. You were professional and competent, and you didn't treat me differently when you realized who I was. We started talking, discovered we had compatible worldviews, and began dating casually. Nothing serious yet, but we're seeing where it goes. Daniel read through her notes, impressed despite himself. You've thought of everything. I've had a lot of time to think. Ivy moved on to the family tree. These are the people you need to know. Uncle Thomas is the current head of the family. He's in his 60s, very traditional, very concerned with maintaining the Langford reputation. He'll ask you about your background and your intentions. Be honest, but vague. You work hard, you're devoted to your daughter, you're not interested in my money. I'm actually not interested in your money. I know. That's why this might actually work. Ivy pointed to another photo. This is Aunt Caroline. She's the family gossip and self-appointed guardian of propriety. She'll try to catch you in inconsistencies or find something scandalous about your past. Don't give her anything to work with. I'm a single father who runs an auto shop. My life isn't that interesting. To Caroline, everything is potentially interesting if it can be used against someone. Ivy's mouth tightened. She's been particularly vocal about her concerns regarding my ability to handle my father's legacy. She'd love to find evidence that I'm unstable or making poor choices. And dating a mechanic counts as a poor choice? Dating anyone counts as poor judgment in Caroline's view, unless they've been vetted by the family and approved through some sort of formal process that probably involves background checks and financial disclosures. Ivy's voice dripped with sarcasm. The fact that you're not from our social circle will be seen as evidence of my rebellious nature and poor judgment. But you want them to see us together anyway. Because dating someone demonstrates I have a personal life. Not dating anyone suggests I'm isolated and struggling. It's a narrow window of acceptability, and you happen to fit right in the middle of it. Ivy tapped the photo of a young woman in her 20s. This is Victoria, the cousin who's getting engaged. She's actually decent, relatively speaking. We're not close, but she's never actively tried to undermine me the way some of the others have. Daniel studied the family tree, trying to memorize faces and relationships. How many people will be at the party tomorrow night? Around 100, but most of them don't matter. Extended family, business associates, society friends. They'll make small talk and drink expensive wine and go home without forming any opinions about you at all. Ivy closed the folder. The people who matter are the ones at brunch tomorrow. That's when you'll be assessed and judged. No pressure. You'll be fine. Ivy offered him a small smile. Just be yourself. You're already more genuine than anyone they're used to dealing with, and that will work in our favor. Daniel wanted to believe her, but the weight of the folder and the complexity of the family dynamics suggested this weekend was going to be more challenging than he'd anticipated. He thought about Emma safe at home with Marco, probably deep in her blanket fort by now, and felt a pang of homesickness that was entirely inappropriate for someone who'd only been gone a few hours. I should call my daughter, he said. Let her know I arrived safely. Of course. I'll clean up here. Ivy started gathering the dishes. Make yourself at home. The guest house is yours for the weekend. Daniel went upstairs to his room and pulled out his phone. Emma answered on the third ring, her voice high with excitement. Dad, we built the best fort ever. It goes from the living room all the way into the hallway, and Uncle Marco says we can sleep in it tonight. That sounds amazing, Em. You'll have to show me pictures. I will. I already took like 20. There was a rustling sound, and then Marco's voice came on the line. Hey, Danny, everything good? Yeah, I'm fine. We just got here, had dinner, going over the schedule for tomorrow. And what's the place like? Daniel looked around the guest house bedroom with its expensive furniture and designer linens. It's like something out of a magazine. I don't think I've ever been anywhere this nice. And the woman? She treating you okay? She's fine. Professional. This whole thing is weird, but I think it's going to be okay. Call me if you need extraction. I don't care what time it is. I will. Thanks, Marco. Daniel heard Emma calling in the background. Let me talk to her again. Emma came back on the line, chattering about the movie they were watching and the popcorn Marco had made and how she was definitely not tired even though it was past her bedtime. Daniel listened and made appropriate responses and tried not to think about how strange it was to be having this normal conversation while sitting in a guest house on a 200-acre estate. Love you, Dad, Emma said finally, her voice starting to blur with sleep despite her protestations. Love you too, kiddo. Be good. Always am. After they hung up, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, staring at his phone. Then he changed into the sleep clothes he'd packed, brushed his teeth in the palatial bathroom, and climbed into a bed that was more comfortable than anything he'd ever experienced. The sheets were soft, the pillows perfect, and he should have fallen asleep immediately. Instead, he lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the guest house and thinking about tomorrow, about meeting Ivy's family, about pretending to be someone's boyfriend for money, about all the ways this could go wrong. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, he finally drifted off, his dreams full of strangers' faces and questions he didn't know how to answer. Morning came too early, announced by sunlight streaming through windows Daniel had forgotten to cover. He groaned and checked his phone. 8:30. He'd slept later than usual, probably because the bed was so comfortable and the room was so quiet. At home, Emma usually woke him by 7 at the latest. He showered and dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, then headed downstairs to find Ivy already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop open and a cup of coffee in her hand. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked younger like this, less polished and more real. "Morning," she said without looking up from her screen. "Coffee's fresh. Mugs are in the cabinet above the maker." Daniel helped himself, grateful for the caffeine. "You're up early." "I don't sleep much." Ivy closed her laptop and gave him her full attention. "How are you feeling about today?" "Nervous, but ready, I think." "Good." Ivy stood and refilled her own mug. "Brunch starts at 11. We should arrive around 11:15, fashionably late, but not so late that it's disrespectful. That gives us a couple hours to go over any last-minute details and make sure you're comfortable." They spent the next hour running through likely conversation topics and rehearsing their cover story. Ivy was patient and thorough, answering Daniel's questions and coaching him on the subtle social dynamics of her family. By the time 10:30 rolled around, Daniel felt as prepared as he was going to be. "I should change," he said, standing and stretching. "What's the dress code for this brunch?" "Business casual, slacks, and a button-down is fine. You don't need the full suit until tonight's party." Ivy was studying him with an appraising eye. "You're handling this well. Most people would be more anxious." "I'm plenty anxious. I'm just good at hiding it." "Another thing we have in common." Daniel went upstairs and changed into the nicer clothes Marco had insisted he pack. Dark slacks, a light blue shirt, leather shoes he'd owned for years but rarely wore. When he came back down, Ivy had also changed into a simple dress and heels, her hair down and styled in soft waves. "You look nervous," he observed. "I am nervous." Ivy grabbed her purse and keys. "This is the first time I've brought anyone to a family event since my father died. People will read into it. They'll make assumptions, and some of them will try to use it against me." "Then why do it at all? Why not just show up alone and deal with whatever comments come?" Ivy was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on the doorknob. "Because I'm tired of being alone, and because sometimes the best defense is giving people exactly what they expect to see, so they stop looking for what you're actually hiding." Before Daniel could ask what she meant by that, Ivy opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. He followed her to the car, his stomach tight with anticipation. The drive to the main house took less than 5 minutes, but felt much longer. Ivy's hands were tight on the steering wheel, her jaw set in a way that suggested she was steeling herself for battle. Daniel wanted to say something reassuring, but he didn't know her well enough to know what would help. The main house looked even more impressive in daylight, all stone and glass and architectural details that spoke of wealth accumulated over generations. Several cars were already parked in the circular drive. Through the large front windows, Daniel could see people moving inside. "Ready?" Ivy asked, not looking at him. "No, but let's go anyway." They got out of the car and walked together toward the front entrance. Ivy's posture changed as they approached. Her shoulders went back, her chin lifted, and her expression smoothed into something polite and controlled. She was putting on armor, Daniel realized. This was how she survived in this world. The front door opened before they reached it, and a woman in her 60s appeared in the doorway. She was elegantly dressed in a designer pantsuit, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression a mixture of surprise and calculation. "Ivy, darling, how wonderful that you could make it." The woman's eyes slid immediately to Daniel, assessing him from head to toe in a single sweep. "And you've brought a guest." "Aunt Caroline." Ivy's voice was warm but guarded. "This is Daniel Brooks. Daniel, this is my Aunt Caroline Langford." "Mrs. Langford." Daniel extended his hand, which Caroline took briefly, her grip cool and minimal. "Mr. Brooks? How interesting." Caroline stepped aside to let them enter. "I don't believe we've heard Ivy mention you before." "We've been keeping things quiet," Ivy said smoothly, her hand finding Daniel's as they crossed the threshold. Her fingers were cold despite the warm day. "Daniel values his privacy, and I've been respecting that." "How considerate." Caroline's tone suggested she found nothing considerate about it at all. "Everyone is gathering in the conservatory. Thomas is quite eager to meet Ivy's mysterious companion." She led them through a massive foyer with marble floors and a grand staircase, down a hallway lined with what were probably priceless paintings, and into a sun-filled room that was all windows and elegant furniture. About 30 people were scattered throughout the space, most holding mimosas or coffee cups, all of them turning to look as Ivy and Daniel entered. The attention was immediate and uncomfortable. Daniel felt every eye in the room assessing him, noting his clothes, his posture, his obvious discomfort. He wanted to run. Instead, he squeezed Ivy's hand gently and tried to look like someone who belonged here. "Ivy!" A tall man in his 60s separated himself from a group near the windows and approached them. He had distinguished gray hair and sharp eyes that reminded Daniel of Ivy's. "Finally, we were beginning to think you weren't coming." "Uncle Thomas." Ivy released Daniel's hand to accept a brief hug from her uncle. "You know I wouldn't miss Victoria's engagement party." "Of course." Thomas's attention shifted to Daniel. "And this must be the young man Caroline just mentioned. I'm Thomas Langford, Ivy's uncle." "Daniel Brooks, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you." Thomas's handshake was firm, his gaze evaluating. "Brooks. That's not a name I'm familiar with. What business is your family in?" And here it was, the first real test. Daniel met Thomas's eyes steadily. "My family isn't in business, sir. I'm a mechanic. I own a small auto repair shop on the south side." The silence that followed was brief but absolute. Daniel felt every person in the room registering this information, cataloging it, forming opinions. Ivy's hand found his again, her grip tighter now. "A mechanic," Thomas repeated, his expression unreadable. "How refreshingly honest. And how did you and Ivy meet?" "She brought her car into my shop about 4 months ago. We got a talking and I asked her to dinner." Daniel kept his voice steady, casual, like this was the most natural thing in the world. "Turned out we had a lot in common." "Common interest between a mechanic and a Langford," Caroline said from behind them, her voice dripping with skepticism. "How extraordinary." "We're both people, Aunt Caroline." Ivy's voice had an edge now. "Surely that's common ground enough." Before Caroline could respond, a younger woman approached them, smiling genuinely. She was in her mid-20s with blonde hair and a friendly demeanor that seemed at odds with the tension in the room. "You must be Daniel. I'm Victoria, Ivy's cousin. It's so nice to finally meet someone who makes her smile." She gave Ivy a quick hug. "You've been holding out on us, cousin." "I wasn't sure there was anything to tell yet," Ivy said, but she returned the hug warmly. "Congratulations on your engagement. Where's Robert?" "Getting us drinks. He's nervous about meeting everyone." Victoria lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I think your uncle terrifies him." "Uncle Thomas terrifies everyone," Ivy said. "It's his superpower." Victoria laughed and turned to Daniel. "So, a mechanic. That must be interesting work. Do you specialize in anything particular?" "General repair and maintenance, mostly. Some restoration work when I have time." Daniel found himself relaxing slightly in the face of Victoria's genuine interest. "I like the problem-solving aspect of it. Every car is different. Every issue requires a unique approach." "That sounds like something Ivy would appreciate. She's always loved solving puzzles." Victoria glanced at her cousin fondly. "Remember when we were kids and you used to take apart all your toys to see how they worked?" "And you used to tell on me to Aunt Caroline," Ivy countered, but there was affection in her voice. They talked for a few more minutes, Victoria asking questions that seemed genuinely curious rather than interrogative. Other family members drifted over, introducing themselves, making polite small talk that was clearly designed to extract information. Daniel answered honestly when he could, and vaguely when he couldn't, following Ivy's earlier coaching. A man in his 30s approached with 2 mimosas, handing one to Victoria. Robert Ashford, he introduced himself to Daniel. Victoria's fiancé. You're the mechanic, right? That's right. Honest work. I respect that. Robert seemed genuinely friendly, if slightly nervous. These family gatherings can be intense. Feel free to hide in a corner with me if you need an escape route. I might take you up on that. Brunch was announced, and everyone moved toward a formal dining room where a buffet had been set up along one wall. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the table could easily seat 40 people. Daniel helped himself to food he didn't really taste, too aware of the eyes still watching him, the quiet conversations happening just out of earshot. He ended up seated between Ivy and Robert, with Thomas directly across the table and Caroline 3 seats down. The conversation flowed around topics Daniel barely understood: business dealings, social events, people he'd never heard of. He focused on his food and tried to look engaged. So, Daniel, Thomas's voice cut through the general chatter. Tell me about your daughter. Ivy mentioned you're a single father. Every instinct Daniel had screamed at him to protect Emma, to keep her out of this world and these people's awareness. But refusing to talk about her would look suspicious, so he forced himself to answer. Her name is Emma. She's 8 years old, in 3rd grade. She's smart and curious and wants to be a scientist when she grows up. A scientist? How ambitious. Thomas's expression softened slightly. Children are a blessing. My own daughter has made me very proud. He glanced at Victoria with genuine warmth before turning back to Daniel. Raising a child alone must be challenging. It has its moments, but Emma's worth every challenge. And what does Emma think of her father's new relationship? Caroline asked, her voice sharp with interest. Daniel met her eyes calmly. She's met Ivy once, briefly. We're taking things slow where Emma's concerned. Her stability is my first priority. As it should be, Thomas said, and for the first time Daniel saw something like approval in the older man's expression. Family should always come first. The rest of brunch passed in a blur of conversation and careful navigation. Daniel watched Ivy interact with her relatives, noting how she shifted her demeanor depending on who she was talking to. Warm with Victoria, guarded with Caroline, respectful but distant with Thomas. She was performing just as much as he was, he realized. Maybe more. When the meal finally ended, people began drifting back to the conservatory or out onto the terrace. Ivy excused them, claiming she wanted to show Daniel the gardens. They escaped outside into the fresh air, walking across manicured lawns toward a path that led into the woods. You did well, Ivy said once they were out of earshot. Better than I expected, honestly. Your family is intense. That's putting it mildly. Ivy's shoulders sagged slightly, some of the careful control dropping away now that they were alone. Caroline already thinks you're beneath me, and Thomas is reserving judgment. But Victoria likes you, which helps. What happens now? Now we have a few hours before we need to start getting ready for tonight's party. We can stay here and walk the grounds, or we can go back to the guest house and avoid people. Guest house sounds good. They walked back to the car in companionable silence. Once they were safely back in the guest house, Ivy kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch with an exhausted sigh. God, I hate these things. Daniel sat in the armchair across from her. Then why do them? Because appearances matter. Because my family is watching every move I make. Because if I don't show up and play the game, they'll use my absence as evidence that I'm not capable of handling my responsibilities. Ivy closed her eyes. You don't understand what it's like, having every aspect of your life scrutinized and judged. You're right. I don't. But I do understand feeling trapped by circumstances you can't control. Daniel thought about the years after Michelle left, struggling to keep the garage afloat while taking care of an infant, feeling like he was drowning and couldn't ask for help. Sometimes you just have to survive until things get better. And if they don't get better, then you keep surviving anyway. Because what else can you do? Ivy opened her eyes and looked at him. I'm starting to understand why I chose you for this. Because I'm good at pretending everything's fine when it's not. Because you're real. Because you don't lie to make things easier. She sat up, tucking her legs underneath her. Everyone in my world deals in appearances and manipulation. You just tell the truth and handle the consequences. It's refreshing. It's also sometimes stupid. Honesty doesn't always serve you well. No, but it lets you sleep at night. Ivy smiled sadly. I don't sleep much anymore. Too many things I'm not saying, too many truths I'm hiding. Daniel wanted to ask what she was hiding, but before he could, Ivy's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression tightened. I need to take this, excuse me. She disappeared upstairs, her voice low and urgent as she answered. Daniel sat alone in the living room, staring out at the perfect grounds and thinking about how strange his life had become in the space of 1 week. His own phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Everything still good? Emma wants to know when you're coming home. Daniel typed back quickly. Still good. Tell her I'll be home tomorrow afternoon and I'll bring her something special. Another text. She says you better bring cake. Despite everything, Daniel smiled. I'll do my best. Upstairs, he could hear Ivy's voice rising in frustration. Whatever call she'd taken, it wasn't going well. He considered going up to check on her, then decided against it. She'd hired him to be her fake boyfriend, not her actual friend. There were boundaries he needed to respect. But when she finally came back downstairs 20 minutes later, her face was pale and her hands were shaking. Ivy, what's wrong? Nothing. It's fine. Just some work complications. She moved past him toward the kitchen, pulling out a bottle of wine with jerky movements. Do you want a drink? I need a drink. It's 3 in the afternoon. I'm aware of the time. She poured herself a large glass and drank half of it in one swallow. God, I hate this. Hate what? What happened? Ivy set down her glass and braced her hands on the counter, her head bowed. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. That was my company's board chairman. There's an emergency meeting called for Monday morning. Someone is making a move against me. What kind of move? The kind that could cost me everything my father built. Ivy's laugh was harsh and bitter. And the timing is perfect, isn't it? I'm here at a family party, appearing social and stable, while back in the city someone is trying to take my company out from under me. Daniel stood and moved closer, uncertain how to help but knowing he needed to try. What do you need? I need to go back. I need to be in that boardroom. I need to fight this before it's too late. Ivy straightened, and Daniel could see her trying to pull herself together. But if I leave now, I prove everyone right. I prove I'm not stable, that I can't balance my personal and professional lives, that I'm not capable of managing the pressure. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Ivy picked up her wine glass again, staring into it like it might hold answers. I genuinely don't know. And Daniel, standing in a stranger's guest house wearing borrowed confidence and pretending to be someone he wasn't, realized that this weekend had just become far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. The silence that followed stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Daniel watched Ivy struggle with her composure, watched her take another sip of wine with hands that weren't quite steady, watched her try to rebuild the careful control that had cracked when she came down those stairs. Tell me what's really happening, he said quietly. Not the version you'd tell your family or your board, the truth. Ivy looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. How much to trust him? How much to reveal? Whether a mechanic she'd hired for the weekend could possibly understand the complexity of her situation. My father didn't just leave me money when he died, she said finally. He left me controlling interest in Langford Industries. 51% of the company, enough to make final decisions without needing board approval. It was supposed to protect me, supposed to ensure I could run things the way he'd taught me. But several board members have been waiting for an opportunity to challenge my leadership since the day I took over. They think I'm too young, too inexperienced, too emotional to handle the responsibility. Ivy's voice was bitter. And they've been watching for any excuse to call my competence into question. Daniel moved to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, giving Ivy space to continue. So what changed? Why now? Because someone has been very carefully building a case against me over the past 6 months. Small things at first. Missed meetings that I didn't actually miss, decisions attributed to me that I never made, reports showing declining performance in divisions I don't oversee. Ivy set down her wine glass and crossed her arms. Someone has been manufacturing evidence that I'm not fit to lead, and now they have enough to call an emergency board meeting and petition for my removal. Can they actually remove you? If you own 51%? They can't take my shares, but they can vote to install an interim CEO and strip me of operational authority. It would be temporary in theory, but in practice it would mean losing control of everything. Ivy's jaw tightened, and once they have control, they'll find ways to make it permanent. Declare me mentally unfit, claim I violated fiduciary duties, manufacture some scandal that requires my resignation. Daniel absorbed this, trying to understand the implications. And the timing, calling the meeting while you're here at your family's party. That's intentional? Of course it's intentional. If I leave the party early, I look unstable and obsessed with work, which supports their narrative. If I stay, I miss the meeting and give them an excuse to move forward without me. Ivy laughed harshly. It's actually brilliant strategy. Whoever planned this understood exactly how to trap me. Who's behind it? I don't know for certain. The board chairman, Richard Morrison, called to inform me about the meeting. He sounded appropriately concerned, but Richard has been angling for more control since my father got sick. He's always believed the company should be run by someone with more experience. Ivy's expression hardened, which is code for someone older and male. Daniel thought about his own experiences with people who judged based on appearances rather than competence. He'd dealt with customers who assumed he couldn't possibly know what he was doing because of his age or his background, who talked down to him until he proved himself through his work. But he'd never faced anything on this scale. "What would your father do?" he asked. The question seemed to surprise Ivy. She was quiet for a moment, considering. He'd fight. He'd show up to that meeting prepared and armed with enough information to destroy whoever was challenging him. He'd make them regret ever questioning his authority. Then that's what you should do. It's not that simple. I can't just leave the party. Why not? Daniel interrupted. You keep saying you can't leave because of how it will look, but you're talking about losing your company, losing everything your father built. If that happens, what does it matter what your family thinks about you leaving a party early? Because my family controls the board seats that matter most, Ivy said. Uncle Thomas holds 10% of the company shares. Aunt Caroline holds 7%. If they side against me in a competence hearing, their testimony would be devastating. I need them to believe I'm stable and capable, not watching me run back to the city to fight fires. So you're trapped. So I'm trapped, Ivy agreed. She picked up her wine glass again, then seemed to think better of it and set it back down. Unless I can find a way to attend the meeting without leaving the party, which is impossible since the meeting is Monday morning and the party is tonight. Daniel's mind was already working through possibilities. What time is the meeting? 9 a.m. Monday in Manhattan. The party tonight runs until midnight at least, probably later. Even if I left immediately after, I wouldn't make it back to the city in time to prepare properly. What if you didn't need to be physically present? Ivy looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Video conference. You stay here, maintain appearances with your family, but attend the board meeting remotely. You'd be participating without abandoning your obligations here. They'd never allow it. Board meetings are supposed to be conducted in person except in emergencies. This is an emergency, Daniel pointed out. They called it with minimal notice while you were out of town. Seems reasonable that you'd need to attend remotely. Ivy was staring at him now with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. That might actually work, if I can frame it correctly, if I have the right evidence prepared. Her mind was clearly racing, working through the logistics. But I'd need access to company files, communication records, financial reports. Everything is back at my office. Can't you access it remotely? Most companies have secure systems for that. I can access some things, but not everything. And I'd need help pulling together the evidence I need, someone who knows where to look and what questions to ask. Ivy pulled out her phone, her fingers already moving across the screen. My assistant, Sarah, is the only person I completely trust, but she's not equipped to handle this kind of investigation alone. Then hire someone who is, private investigator, forensic accountant, whatever you need. On a Saturday afternoon with less than 48 hours to prepare? Ivy shook her head. Even if I could find someone reliable on that timeline, I don't know who to trust. Whoever is orchestrating this has been planning for months. They could have people planted throughout the company, watching what I do. Daniel watched her pace the kitchen, watched her cycle through options and dismiss them, watched her brilliant mind work against the constraints of her situation. He understood that feeling, the frustration of seeing solutions just out of reach, knowing what needed to be done but lacking the resources to do it. What if you had someone on the inside who they wouldn't suspect? He said slowly. Ivy stopped pacing. What are you talking about? Your family thinks I'm just your boyfriend, a mechanic with no connection to your business world. If I went back to the city tonight, started asking questions, gathering information, who would suspect me? Daniel, that's... Ivy started to protest, then stopped. Actually insane. You don't know anything about corporate investigations or financial analysis or any of the systems you'd need to navigate. No, but I know how to follow instructions. I know how to be methodical and thorough. And I know how to ask questions that don't raise suspicions. Daniel moved closer. You said your assistant Sarah knows where to find the evidence. Let her tell me what to look for. I'll be your hands in the city while you stay here and maintain appearances. You do that? Drive back to the city tonight and spend your Sunday digging through corporate files? I do it for $20,000, Daniel said honestly. And because someone trying to take your company through manufactured evidence pisses me off. I've dealt with people who judge based on assumptions rather than facts my entire life. I don't like it when they win. Ivy was staring at him like she'd never quite seen him before. This isn't what you signed up for. No, it's not. But I'm here, and I can help, and that money still matters to me and my daughter. Daniel met her eyes steadily. Tell me what you need me to do. For a moment, Ivy didn't respond. Then she straightened her shoulders, and Daniel saw the shift happen, saw her transform from someone overwhelmed by circumstances into someone ready to fight back. Okay, she said. Okay, here's what we're going to do. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of planning. Ivy called her assistant Sarah, explained the situation in rapid-fire detail, and put her on speaker so she could brief Daniel directly. Sarah's voice was crisp and professional, asking sharp questions and making lists of exactly what information they'd need to build Ivy's defense. The key is proving that the performance issues they're citing aren't actually your fault, Sarah explained. I've been tracking some irregularities in division reports for weeks, but I haven't had time to dig deeper. If you can get into the archive server and pull the original submissions versus the versions that went to the board, we might be able to show they've been altered. How would I access the archive server? Daniel asked, taking notes on his phone. I'll set you up with temporary credentials and walk you through the system remotely. You'll need to be in the office. The archive can't be accessed from outside the network for security reasons. What about security at the building? Won't they question why I'm there on a Sunday? I'll add you to the visitor log as my cousin helping with a family emergency. Security knows me. They won't ask questions. Sarah paused. Mr. Brooks, I should tell you, if whoever is behind this finds out you're helping Ms. Langford investigate, they might try to interfere. You need to be careful. I'll be careful, Daniel promised, though he had no idea what that actually meant in this context. They worked through the logistics until Ivy was satisfied that Daniel understood what he needed to do. Then she booked him a car service to drive him back to the city, faster and more reliable than his own truck, she insisted. He'd go straight to the Langford Industries office building, meet Sarah in the lobby, and spend Sunday gathering evidence while Ivy stayed at the estate and attended the engagement party. I should come with you, Ivy said as Daniel packed his overnight bag. This is my company, my fight. I should be there. And give them exactly what they want? You showing up panicked and abandoning your family obligations? Daniel shook his head. No, you stay here, you smile at the party tonight, you act like everything is perfectly fine. That's how you prove you can handle pressure. I hate this. I know, but it's the smart play. Daniel checked his watch. The car will be here in 20 minutes. We should probably figure out what to tell your family about why I'm leaving. Work emergency at your garage, something only you can handle. You tried to get out of it, but it's unavoidable. Ivy's voice was steady again, back in control. I'll be disappointed but understanding. It'll actually make us look more real. What couple doesn't deal with inconvenient work conflicts? It was a good cover story. and it made Daniel wonder how often Ivy had to construct elaborate lies to navigate her world. He thought about Emma, about raising her to be honest and direct, and felt a flash of gratitude that his daughter would never have to learn these skills. The car arrived exactly on time. A black sedan with a professional driver who loaded Daniel's bag without comment. Ivy walked him out to the driveway, maintaining appearances in case anyone was watching from the main house. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know this isn't what you agreed to, and I know I'm asking you to take risks you shouldn't have to take. But thank you." "Just make sure you're ready for that video conference Monday morning," Daniel replied. "I'm not doing all this evidence gathering just to watch you fumble the presentation." Ivy smiled, and for the first time since that phone call earlier, it looked genuine. "I won't fumble, that's a promise." Daniel climbed into the car and watched through the rear window as Ivy grew smaller in the distance, standing alone in the driveway of her family's estate. Then the car turned onto the main road, and she disappeared from view entirely. The drive back to the city took 90 minutes. Daniel spent the time on the phone with Marco, explaining that plans had changed and he needed to work through Sunday but would definitely be home by Monday afternoon. Marco asked questions Daniel couldn't fully answer, eventually accepting a vague explanation about helping Ivy with a business crisis. "You're getting in deep with this woman," Marco observed. "I hope you know what you're doing." "So do I," Daniel admitted. When the car finally pulled up in front of the Langford Industries building, Daniel felt his stomach tighten with nerves. The building was a sleek glass tower in Manhattan's financial district, the kind of place he'd normally only see in movies. The lobby was all marble and chrome, empty except for a security guard at the desk, and a young woman in business casual clothes waiting near the elevators. Sarah Chen was in her late 20s, Asian American, with sharp eyes and the efficient demeanor of someone who managed complicated schedules for a living. She shook Daniel's hand with a firm grip. "Mr. Brooks, thank you for coming." "Call me Daniel, and I should be thanking you for setting this up." Sarah led him through security, her visitor credentials getting them past the desk without issue, and into an elevator that required her badge to access the upper floors. They rode in silence to the 15th floor, emerging into a darkened office space that felt eerie and abandoned on a weekend evening. "Ms. Langford's office is this way." Sarah navigated through the maze of cubicles and meeting rooms to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "I've already logged you into the archive system on her computer. The files we need should be organized by division and date." Daniel sat down at Ivy's desk, looking at the array of monitors and the expensive leather chair, and trying not to feel completely out of his depth. Sarah pulled up a second chair and began walking him through the file structure, showing him how to compare original reports to the versions submitted to the board. "See this?" Sarah pointed to two documents side by side. The original quarterly report from the manufacturing division shows a 12% increase in efficiency, but the version that went to the board shows a 3% decrease. Someone altered the data before it reached the board members. Can we prove who altered it? That's what we need to find out. The system keeps logs of every access and modification, but you need administrative privileges to see them. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I'm going to try something. Miss Langford's father set up a backdoor access code before he died. Something only she and I know about. If it still works..." The screen flickered, then displayed a new interface Daniel didn't recognize. Sarah exhaled in relief. "It worked. Okay, this shows us every modification made to board documents in the past 6 months, including who made the changes and when." She pulled up a spreadsheet that made Daniel's head hurt just looking at it. "This is going to take hours to sort through." "Then we better get started." They worked steadily through the evening, Sarah explaining what they were looking for while Daniel pulled files and compared versions and flagged discrepancies. The pattern that emerged was clear and damning. Someone with administrative access had been systematically altering performance reports to make Ivy look incompetent, and they'd been careful about it, making small changes that wouldn't be noticed individually but added up to a comprehensive picture of failure. "Look at this," Daniel said around 9 p.m., pointing to a log entry. "This modification was made from an executive terminal. Can we trace which one?" Sarah leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "That's Richard Morrison's terminal, the board chairman." She pulled up more logs, her expression growing darker. "Daniel, almost all of these alterations came from Morrison's access code. He's been doing this personally." That seems stupid. Wouldn't he know the logs would show his involvement? Not if he planned to delete the logs after Ivy was removed. Sarah sat back, running her hands through her hair. He must have assumed once he had interim CEO authority, he could erase the evidence and claim the original reports were the accurate ones. No one would question the new CEO's version of events. Daniel stared at the screen, feeling anger build in his chest. So he's been deliberately sabotaging her for months, creating false evidence of incompetence, planning to take over her company and erase any proof of what he did. That's exactly what he's been doing. Sarah's voice was hard. And he almost got away with it. Do we have enough to prove this to the board? We have the logs showing alterations, the original documents proving the company was actually performing well under Ms. Langford's leadership, and a clear pattern of manipulation coming from Morrison's terminal. Sarah was already copying files to a secure drive. If Ms. Langford presents this evidence at Monday's meeting, Morrison won't just lose his bid to remove her, he'll be facing criminal charges for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Daniel felt a grim satisfaction. Good. Send everything to Ivy so she can start preparing her presentation. They spent another hour organizing the evidence into a clear narrative, building a case that even board members with limited technical knowledge could follow. Sarah encrypted everything and uploaded it to a secure server Ivy could access remotely. By the time they finished, it was past 11 p.m., and Daniel's eyes were burning from staring at screens. Thank you, Sarah said as they shut down the systems and prepared to leave. Ms. Langford is lucky to have someone willing to fight for her like this. I'm just helping out, Daniel replied, uncomfortable with the gratitude. She's paying me to be here. Maybe that's how it started. But you stayed in that office for 6 hours on a Saturday night, pulling apart financial records because you care about the outcome, not because of money. Sarah gave him a knowing look. Whatever you two have, whether it's real or not, it matters. Don't lose sight of that. The car service drove Daniel back toward the estate, arriving just after midnight. The main house was still ablaze with light, music, and laughter drifting across the grounds. The engagement party was clearly still in full swing. Daniel went directly to the guest house, exhausted and hoping to avoid anyone who might ask questions about his emergency garage situation. He found Ivy sitting on the porch in her evening gown, a wrap around her shoulders against the cool night air. She stood when she saw him, relief clear on her face. You're back, did you? We got everything, Daniel interrupted. Morrison's been altering your performance reports for months using his administrative access. Sarah pulled all the logs, all the original documents, everything you need to prove what he's been doing. Ivy's hand went to her mouth. Richard Morrison. I knew he wanted more control, but I never thought he'd go this far. Well, he did, and now we can prove it. Daniel climbed the porch steps, suddenly aware of how tired he was. Sarah uploaded everything to your secure server. You should have access by now. Ivy pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. A moment later, she exhaled shakily. I see it. Oh my God, Daniel, this is everything we needed. This is enough to destroy him. That's what Sarah said. She thinks if you present this at Monday's meeting, Morrison won't just lose his power play. He'll face criminal charges. He should face charges. What he did is corporate fraud on a massive scale. Ivy was scrolling through files, her expression growing harder with each screen. He betrayed my father's trust, undermined everything I've been trying to build, and nearly destroyed me in the process. I'm going to make sure he pays for it. Daniel leaned against the porch railing, watching her. This was a different Ivy than the one he'd met in his garage. This was someone fierce and focused, someone ready for battle. He could see what her father must have seen in her, the steel underneath the careful composure. How was the party? He asked. Ivy looked up from her phone, seeming surprised by the question. Tedious. Uncle Thomas made a speech about family legacy. Victoria and Robert looked happy. Aunt Caroline spent the evening making pointed comments about your convenient work emergency. She set her phone aside. But I smiled and made small talk and acted like everything was fine, exactly as planned. Several people commented on how well I'm handling things. Good. That's what we needed. Daniel, Ivy moved closer, her expression serious. What you did tonight, going to the city, working with Sarah, gathering evidence, that was far beyond what I hired you to do. You could have just stayed here, collected your money, and walked away from all of this. I know. So why didn't you? Daniel thought about how to answer that. He thought about watching Ivy struggle with impossible choices, about the desperation in her voice when she talked about losing everything her father built. He thought about Emma and the lessons he was trying to teach her about standing up against injustice, even when it was hard. Because it was the right thing to do, he said finally. And because I don't like watching people get away with manipulating systems and hurting others just because they have power. Ivy was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm despite the cool night. Thank you. For all of it. For believing me, for helping me, for being exactly who you are. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. Save the thanks for after you win that board meeting. We're not done yet. No, Ivy agreed, and her smile was fierce. We're not done yet. Not by a long shot. They stood together on the porch, hands linked, looking out at the darkened estate grounds. Tomorrow was Sunday, which meant one more day of maintaining appearances before the real battle began. Tomorrow, Ivy would attend the final family brunch, smile through more scrutiny and judgment, and continue playing the role of the stable, capable heir. And Monday morning, she would face her board and fight for everything that mattered. But tonight, for just a few hours, they could stand here together and take comfort in the fact that they had a weapon Morrison didn't expect. They had the truth, carefully documented and impossible to deny. They had evidence that would turn his own schemes against him. You should get some sleep, Daniel said eventually. You've got a long day tomorrow, and you'll need to be sharp Monday morning. So should you. You spent 6 hours in an office pulling apart financial records after driving back and forth to the city. Ivy released his hand reluctantly. But you're right. We both need rest. She turned to go inside, then paused in the doorway. Daniel, I meant what I said earlier. You being here, helping me through this, it matters more than I can explain. Whatever happens Monday, I want you to know that. I know, Daniel said quietly. Now go get some sleep. Ivy disappeared inside, and Daniel stood alone on the porch for a few minutes longer, breathing in the cool night air and thinking about how strange his life had become. 1 week ago, he'd been closing his garage on an ordinary Friday night. Now he was standing on a millionaire's estate after spending his evening conducting corporate espionage. His phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Emma's asleep. Everything good on your end? Daniel typed back. Everything's fine. Be home tomorrow afternoon like I promised. Another text. You're being careful, right? Not getting in over your head? Daniel looked up at the guest house, at the main estate beyond it, at the world of wealth and power and complicated family dynamics he'd temporarily entered. He thought about boardrooms and altered reports and a woman fighting to keep what was rightfully hers. Trying to be, he typed back. Talk tomorrow. He went inside and climbed the stairs to his room, the exhaustion finally catching up with him. Tomorrow was Sunday, the final day of this strange weekend. One more round of family interactions, one more performance of being Ivy's supportive boyfriend. And then Monday would come, and they'd find out if all of this, the planning, the investigation, the careful gathering of evidence, had been enough. Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep despite his exhaustion. Somewhere in the main house, Ivy's family was still celebrating, still drinking expensive wine and making small talk and completely unaware of the corporate battle brewing just beneath the surface of their social gathering. And somewhere in Manhattan, Richard Morrison was probably sleeping peacefully, confident in his plan to take control of Langford Industries on Monday morning, completely unaware that his careful scheme was about to explode in his face. Daniel smiled grimly in the darkness. Monday was going to be very interesting. Eventually, despite everything, sleep found him. His last conscious thought was of Emma, safe at home with Marco, and his promise to bring her cake from the party. He'd have to remember to ask Ivy about that in the morning. The weekend wasn't over yet, but the end was finally in sight, and after everything that had happened in the past 2 days, Daniel was more than ready to get back to his normal life. Though somehow he suspected that after this weekend, nothing would feel quite normal again. Sunday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine streaming through the guest house windows and the sound of birds that probably cost more to maintain than Daniel's monthly rent. He woke disoriented, forgetting for a moment where he was, before the events of the previous day came rushing back. The emergency board meeting. Morrison's fraud. 6 hours in a Manhattan office building pulling apart financial records. He checked his phone. 8:30. A text from Ivy sent 20 minutes earlier. Final brunch at 10. Wear something casual but nice, and thank you again for yesterday. Daniel showered and dressed in khakis and a polo shirt, the nicest casual clothes he'd packed. When he came downstairs, he found Ivy in the kitchen making coffee, already dressed in a simple sundress that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, but somehow looked effortless on her. "Morning," she said, handing him a mug without asking if he wanted one. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I expected. You?" "I didn't sleep much. Spent most of the night going through the evidence you and Sarah compiled, building my presentation for tomorrow." Ivy's eyes had dark circles under them, but there was an energy to her movements that suggested she was running on adrenaline and determination. "It's solid, Daniel. Everything Morrison did is documented, time-stamped, impossible to deny. When I present this to the board, he's finished." "Good." Daniel accepted the coffee gratefully. "What's the plan for today?" "We survive one more family meal, make appropriate small talk, and then you're free to go home. I'll stay through this afternoon to avoid raising suspicions, but by tonight I need to be back in the city preparing." Ivy leaned against the counter, cradling her own mug. "Uncle Thomas will probably want to have a private conversation with me before we leave. He likes to assess situations and offer unsolicited advice." "About Morrison's takeover attempt?" "He doesn't know about that yet. Nobody does except you, me, and Sarah." Ivy's expression was grim. "Thomas will want to talk about you, about whether I'm making good choices in my personal life, about his concerns regarding my judgment and stability." "What are you going to tell him?" "That my personal life is none of his business, but in more diplomatic words." Ivy set down her mug. "The irony is that after tomorrow's board meeting, all their concerns about my competence will be irrelevant. I'll have proven I can identify threats, gather evidence, and defend the company against internal sabotage. That's more leadership capability than most people demonstrate in years." Daniel studied her, noting the tension in her shoulders despite her confident words. "You're nervous about the meeting." "Terrified," Ivy admitted. "This is the biggest fight of my professional life, and I'll be conducting it over video conference while sitting in this guest house, trying to project authority through a computer screen. If I stumble, if I let Morrison get under my skin, if the board decides the optics of remote attendance make me look weak—" "You won't stumble," Daniel interrupted. "You're one of the most controlled people I've ever met. You've spent this entire weekend managing your family's scrutiny and judgment while simultaneously dealing with a corporate crisis. If you can handle that, you can handle a board meeting." Ivy's smile was small but genuine. "When did you become my motivational coach?" "Around the same time I became your fake boyfriend and corporate investigator. I'm a man of many talents." They finished their coffee in companionable silence, and then walked together to the main house for what Daniel hoped would be the final family gathering of this bizarre weekend. The dining room was set for a more intimate meal than Saturday's brunch. Just immediate family, maybe 15 people. Thomas was already seated at the head of the table, reading a newspaper. Caroline was arranging flowers in a vase by the window. Victoria and Robert were talking quietly in the corner. "Ivy, darling," Caroline said when she noticed them. "And Daniel, you're still here. I thought your work emergency would keep you away longer." "My employee was able to handle most of it," Daniel said smoothly, sticking to the cover story they'd prepared. "I got back late last night." "How convenient." Caroline's tone suggested she found nothing convenient about it. "Well, do sit down. Thomas wanted to discuss some family business this morning." They took seats near the middle of the table, and Daniel felt the familiar weight of scrutiny as other family members filtered in. Conversations flowed around topics he only half understood: investment strategies, social obligations, people whose names meant nothing to him. He focused on his food and tried to look engaged without actually participating. "Daniel," Thomas said suddenly, his voice cutting through the general chatter. "I understand you have a daughter. How is she handling her father's new relationship?" Every eye at the table turned toward him. Daniel set down his fork carefully, giving himself a moment to formulate his response. "Emma's doing well. She's young enough that she adapts easily to changes, and Ivy and I have been careful not to rush things where she's concerned." He met Thomas's gaze steadily. "My daughter's well-being is my first priority, always. Any relationship I'm in has to work for her, not just for me." A commendable approach. Thomas nodded slowly. Children need stability. My own daughter has been fortunate to grow up with both parents present and a clear understanding of her place in the family structure. Daniel wasn't sure if that was a subtle dig at his single-parent status or just an observation, but he chose to take it at face value. Emma has stability. She has a father who loves her, a home, a community. She knows she's valued and protected. That's what matters. Indeed. Thomas returned his attention to his breakfast. Ivy, I'd like to speak with you privately after the meal, if you have time. Of course, Uncle Thomas. Ivy's voice was perfectly composed, but Daniel felt her tense beside him. The rest of brunch passed slowly. Victoria announced that she and Robert were planning a spring wedding, which generated enthusiastic conversation about venues and guest lists. Caroline offered pointed advice about maintaining proper wedding etiquette and not letting modern casual attitudes undermine the solemnity of the occasion. Daniel watched Ivy navigate these interactions with practiced ease, offering congratulations and asking appropriate questions while revealing nothing of the battle she was preparing to fight in less than 24 hours. When the meal finally ended, Thomas gestured for Ivy to follow him to his study. Daniel caught her eye and received a subtle nod in return. She could handle this. He wandered out to the terrace with his coffee, finding Robert already there, looking slightly overwhelmed. Family gatherings are intense, Robert observed. I'm still getting used to it. How long have you and Victoria been together? 3 years. But this is only my second time at one of these estate events. Usually Victoria handles family obligations solo. Robert leaned against the railing. She warned me they'd be watching everything I do, assessing whether I'm worthy of the Langford name. It's like auditioning for a role you didn't ask for. Daniel understood that feeling more than Robert probably knew. How do you deal with it? I remind myself that I love Victoria, and she loves me, and ultimately that's what matters. Her family's approval would be nice, but we don't need it to be happy together. Robert glanced at Daniel. What about you? How are you handling all this? One day at a time, Daniel said honestly. Ivy and I are still figuring things out. The family scrutiny is definitely an adjustment. Well, for what it's worth, you seem good for her. I've known Ivy casually for a few years through family events, and I've never seen her as relaxed as she was yesterday when you two arrived. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Daniel felt a twinge of guilt at the deception, but pushed it aside. In a strange way, he supposed they were good for each other. Ivy got the appearance of stability she needed, and Daniel was getting enough money to give Emma opportunities he couldn't otherwise afford. It was transactional, but it was also oddly honest in its way. Inside the house, Ivy sat across from her uncle in his wood-paneled study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the kind of masculine decor that suggested old money and older traditions. Thomas settled into his chair and regarded her with the assessing gaze she'd known her entire life. You seem well, he began. Better than I expected, given everything that's happened in the past 6 months. I'm managing, Ivy replied carefully. Your young man seems decent enough, rough around the edges, obviously not from our world, but he appears genuine in his affection for you. Thomas steepled his fingers. I assume you've considered the implications of pursuing a relationship with someone from such a different background. I've considered many things, Uncle Thomas. I'm sure you have. You're your father's daughter, too intelligent for your own good sometimes. Thomas's expression softened slightly. I worry about you, Ivy. Taking on the company at your age, dealing with the board's scrutiny, managing the family's expectations. It's a tremendous amount of pressure. I can handle it. Can you? Thomas leaned forward. Because there are people on the board who believe you're struggling. Richard Morrison called me Friday, expressed concerns about some performance issues and your ability to address them effectively. Ivy's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. Richard called you. What did he say? That there might be a need for interim leadership while you get your footing. That the company would benefit from someone with more experience guiding things until you're ready. Thomas watched her carefully. He suggested I might consider stepping into an advisory role, using my shares to help stabilize the situation. So that was Morrison's play. He wasn't just trying to remove Ivy. He was trying to recruit her own family members to support the takeover, using their concern for her well-being as leverage. It was brilliant and infuriating in equal measure. "What did you tell him?" Ivy asked, keeping her voice level. "I told him I'd consider his concerns and discuss them with you directly." Thomas regarded her seriously. "Are you struggling, Ivy? Is the company too much for you right now?" This was the moment. Ivy could tell her uncle everything about Morrison's fraud, about the altered reports, about the evidence she and Daniel had gathered. She could recruit Thomas as an ally, use his influence to strengthen her position before tomorrow's meeting. Or she could keep her cards close and deal with Morrison on her own terms, proving to her uncle and everyone else that she didn't need rescuing. "I'm not struggling," Ivy said firmly. "The company is performing well under my leadership, and any reports suggesting otherwise are inaccurate. I'm addressing some internal issues that will be resolved very soon, and I'd appreciate it if you'd reserve judgment until after I've had a chance to present my full assessment to the board." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "You sound very confident." "I am confident because I know exactly what's happening in my company, and I know how to fix it." Ivy met her uncle's eyes. "Tomorrow morning, there's a board meeting that Richard Morrison called. I'll be attending remotely from here and presenting information that will clarify the situation significantly. After that meeting, I think you'll find many of your concerns addressed." "You're being deliberately cryptic. I'm being appropriately cautious about discussing company business before it's been formally addressed with the board." Ivy softened her tone slightly. "I appreciate your concern, Uncle Thomas, truly, but I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing and that I'm my father's daughter in more ways than just intelligence." Something flickered in Thomas's expression, recognition, perhaps, or approval. "Your father could be ruthless when necessary. He didn't suffer fools or tolerate betrayal." "Neither do I," Ivy said quietly. Thomas nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll await the results of tomorrow's board meeting before making any decisions about Richard's suggestions. But Ivy, if you're walking into a fight, make sure you're prepared to win. In our world, you don't get second chances." "I'm prepared," Ivy assured him, "more prepared than anyone expects." She left the study feeling shaken but resolved. Morrison had been working multiple angles, trying to undermine her with the board and recruit her family as allies in her removal. It was sophisticated strategy, and if she hadn't discovered his fraud in time, it might have worked. But now she knew the full scope of his plan, and tomorrow she would dismantle it piece by piece. She found Daniel on the terrace, talking with Robert about something that made them both laugh. The sound of Daniel's genuine laughter was jarring after the tension of her uncle's study. A reminder that there were people in the world who didn't constantly calculate angles and measure words and navigate complex power dynamics with every interaction. "Ready to go?" she asked, approaching them. "Whenever you are." Daniel caught something in her expression and excused himself from Robert. "Everything okay?" "Fine, I'll tell you in the car." Ivy managed a smile for Robert. "Congratulations again on the engagement. You and Victoria will be very happy together." "Thanks, Ivy, and good luck with everything." The words were casual, but Ivy wondered if Victoria had told him something, if he somehow knew there was a battle brewing. She pushed the thought aside and focused on getting through the next hour of polite goodbyes and family farewells. Caroline cornered her near the front door, her expression sharp with curiosity. "Leaving so soon? I thought you'd stay through dinner at least." "I have work to prepare for tomorrow," Ivy said simply. "And Daniel needs to get back to his daughter." "Of course, the daughter." Caroline's gaze swept over Daniel, who was loading their bags into Ivy's car. "He seems very devoted to her." "He is. It's one of the things I admire most about him." "How progressive of you." Caroline's tone suggested she found nothing admirable about it. "Well, do give our regards to the child. What was her name again?" "Emma," Ivy supplied, feeling protective of a little girl she'd only met once. "And I will." The drive back to the guest house felt like an escape. Ivy exhaled slowly as they pulled away from the main house, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders. "That bad?" Daniel asked. "Morrison's been calling my uncle, trying to recruit him as an ally in the takeover. He's playing this from multiple angles, using family concern as a weapon." Ivy gripped the steering wheel tightly. If we hadn't found that evidence, if I'd walked into tomorrow's meeting unprepared, he would have had support from both the board and my own family to remove me. "But you are prepared, and tomorrow you're going to destroy him." "Tomorrow I'm going to try." Ivy pulled up in front of the guest house and turned off the engine. Daniel, I need you to understand something. What happens in that boardroom tomorrow, it's going to get ugly. Morrison won't go down quietly, and he'll try every tactic he can think of to discredit the evidence and turn things around. It might get personal. He might bring up my age, my inexperience, my father's death, anything he can use to make me look weak or emotional. And you'll handle it, because you're neither weak nor emotional. You're angry and prepared, which is much more dangerous. Daniel turned to face her. Ivy, you've been fighting your whole life to prove yourself in a world that judges you based on your age and your gender and everything except your actual competence. Tomorrow is just another round of that fight, and this time you have evidence on your side. This time I have you on my side, Ivy corrected quietly. If you hadn't agreed to help, if you hadn't spent yesterday gathering evidence, I'd be walking into that meeting with nothing but suspicions and anger. You gave me the weapons I needed. Sarah did most of the actual work. I just followed instructions. You did more than that, and you know it. Ivy reached across the console and took his hand. When this is over, when Morrison is gone and the company is secure, I want you to know that this weekend, all of it, the fake relationship and the real help, it mattered. You mattered. Daniel looked down at their joined hands, feeling the weight of her gratitude and something else he couldn't quite name. This wasn't supposed to be complicated. He was supposed to show up, play a role, collect his money, and go home. But somewhere between Saturday brunch and Sunday morning, it had become something more than a transaction. We should get you packed, he said, gently extracting his hand. You need to get back to the city and finalize your presentation, and I need to get home to Emma. They spent the next hour packing and cleaning the guest house, erasing evidence of their stay. Ivy worked with methodical efficiency, her mind clearly already shifting to tomorrow's battle. Daniel watched her transform back into the CEO he'd glimpsed in that Manhattan office, focused, strategic, ready for war. The drive back to the city was quiet. Ivy navigated traffic with the same precision she applied to everything else, while Daniel watched the landscape change from manicured estates to suburban sprawl to urban density. Somewhere in this city, Morrison was probably preparing his own presentation, confident in his plan to remove Ivy and take control of the company. He had no idea what was coming. Where should I drop you? Ivy asked as they entered Daniel's neighborhood. My apartment is fine. Marco has Emma there. Ivy pulled up in front of his building, the sleek sedan looking absurdly out of place on the worn street. She put the car in park but didn't move to unlock the doors. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I'm going to face my board and fight for my company. And when I win, because I am going to win, I want you to know that it's partly because of you. Ivy's voice was steady but soft. You showed up when I needed help, even though I was a stranger asking you to do ridiculous things. You trusted me enough to get involved in a situation that could have blown up in your face, and you never once asked for anything beyond what we agreed to. You're paying me $20,000, Ivy. I'd say that's asking for plenty. The money was to get you here. What you actually did, going to the city, working with Sarah, gathering evidence, supporting me through family scrutiny, that went far beyond what $20,000 buys. Ivy turned to look at him directly. So I'm asking you now, before this weekend officially ends, what do you want? Real answer, not the careful one you think you should give. Daniel thought about that question. He thought about Emma and college funds and breathing room. He thought about his garage and the leak in the roof and all the practical concerns that drove his decision to take Ivy's offer in the first place. But he also thought about standing on that porch last night, holding hands with someone who understood what it felt like to fight for what mattered against impossible odds. I want to know that tomorrow goes well for you, he said finally. I want to know that Morrison faces consequences for what he did. And I want to go home to my daughter and tell her that sometimes helping people is worth the risk, even when it's complicated. Ivy smiled, and it was the most genuine expression he'd seen from her all weekend. You're a good man, Daniel Brooks. Your daughter is lucky to have you. So are the people you choose to help. Daniel opened the car door. Good luck tomorrow. Call me when it's over if you want. I'll be curious to hear how it goes. I will. And Daniel? Ivy waited until he looked back at her. Thank you for everything. He nodded and climbed out of the car, grabbing his bag from the back seat. Ivy waited until he was safely inside the building's entrance before pulling away. the sedan disappearing into traffic. Daniel stood in the lobby for a moment, feeling the strangeness of returning to his normal life after the intensity of the weekend. Then he climbed the stairs to his apartment, where Marco opened the door before he could even knock. "Dad!" Emma launched herself at him, and Daniel caught her automatically, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hey, kiddo, miss me?" "So much. Uncle Marco wouldn't let me stay up late, and he made me eat vegetables, and he didn't bring me cake like you promised." Daniel caught Marco's eye over Emma's head and mouthed, "Thank you." Marco grinned and started gathering his things. "Your dad's back now, so I'm heading out. But, Em, we're definitely building another blanket fort next time, right?" "The biggest one ever," Emma agreed enthusiastically. After Marco left, Daniel settled onto the couch with Emma tucked against his side, her small body warm and solid and real in a way that grounded him after the weekend's surreal experiences. "Tell me about the party," Emma demanded. "Was it fancy? Did they have cake? Did you bring me any?" "It was very fancy. They had multiple cakes. And I'm sorry, but I left before I could bring you a piece." Daniel pulled out his phone. "But I did take some pictures. Want to see?" He showed her photos of the estate grounds, carefully cropped to avoid showing people. Emma oohed and awed appropriately, asking questions about the gardens and the main house, and whether there were any animals. "Was your friend Ivy there?" "She was. It was her family's party." "Is she your girlfriend now?" Daniel hesitated, unsure how to answer. "No, Em. Ivy and I are just friends. I was helping her with something this weekend." "But you like her, right? You look happy in the pictures." Daniel studied the photos he'd taken, seeing what Emma saw, himself smiling genuinely, relaxed despite the chaos happening beneath the surface. "I do like her. She's a good person who's dealing with some difficult things, but that doesn't mean we're dating." "Okay." Emma seemed satisfied with that answer. She snuggled closer. "I'm glad you're home. I missed you." "I missed you too, kiddo, more than you know." They spent the rest of the evening doing normal Sunday things, making dinner together, watching a movie, reading before bed. Daniel tucked Emma in and sat with her until she fell asleep, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood dreams. In his own room later, Daniel lay awake thinking about tomorrow, about Ivy facing her board and presenting evidence that would either save or destroy her professional life, about Morrison and the elaborate fraud he'd perpetrated, about what justice looked like when it finally arrived. His phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. "I'm ready. Presentation is solid. Evidence is irrefutable. Tomorrow I fight." Daniel typed back, "Tomorrow you win. Get some sleep." "You too." And Daniel, thank you for believing in me. He stared at that message for a long time before responding, "Thank you for being worth believing in." Monday morning, Daniel opened the garage as usual, going through familiar routines while his mind was elsewhere. He kept checking his phone, waiting for news. The board meeting started at 9. By now, Ivy would be presenting her evidence. By now, Morrison would be realizing his carefully constructed scheme was falling apart. At 11:30, his phone rang. Ivy's name on the screen. "Tell me," Daniel said without preamble. "It's over." Ivy's voice was shaking, but with triumph rather than fear. Morrison tried to deny everything at first, claimed the logs were fabricated, suggested I was so desperate to keep control that I'd manufactured evidence against him. But Sarah was on the call, and she walked the board through the technical details, and there was no way he could explain away his administrative access on all those altered files. What happened? The board voted unanimously to remove him as chairman and refer his actions to law enforcement. He's facing criminal charges for corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and about 6 other violations the corporate lawyers are still cataloging. Ivy laughed, the sound slightly manic. "He tried to make me look weak and unstable, and instead he destroyed his own career and reputation. It's beautiful, Daniel. It's perfect justice." "And your position?" "Secure. The board formally reaffirmed my authority as CEO and issued a statement of confidence in my leadership. Several members personally apologized for not catching Morrison's manipulation earlier." Ivy's voice softened. "I won, Daniel. We won." "You won," Daniel corrected. "I just helped gather the evidence. You're the one who had the courage to fight." "We won," Ivy insisted. "This doesn't happen without you. I want you to accept that." Daniel smiled, wiping his hands on his shop rag. "Okay, we won. Congratulations, Ivy. You deserve this." "So do you. I'm transferring the second half of your payment this afternoon. 20,000 total, as promised." "I appreciate it. That money is going to make a real difference for me and Emma." There was a pause, and Daniel could hear something in the silence. A question Ivy wasn't quite asking, a possibility neither of them was ready to name. "Daniel," she said finally, "what happens now, with us, I mean? Do we just go back to our separate lives and pretend this weekend never happened?" "I don't think we can pretend it never happened," Daniel said honestly. "But I also don't know what happens next. You've got a company to run and a corporate crisis to clean up. I've got a garage and a daughter and a life that's very different from yours." "Different doesn't mean incompatible." "No, but it means complicated, and we both have enough complications already." Another pause. Then Ivy spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "You're right. Of course you're right. Thank you again, Daniel, for everything. Take care of yourself, Ivy, and if you ever need an honest opinion from someone outside your world, you know where to find me." "I do. Goodbye, Daniel." "Goodbye." Daniel ended the call and stood in his garage, surrounded by tools and cars and the familiar smell of motor oil, feeling like he'd just closed the door on something that might have been important. But Emma needed stability, and Ivy needed to focus on her company, and sometimes the smart choice was walking away while things were still good. His phone buzzed with a notification. Payment received, $20,000. Daniel stared at the number, thinking about college funds and roof repairs and breathing room and all the practical reasons he'd agreed to this insane weekend in the first place. He'd accomplished what he set out to do. He'd helped someone who needed it and been compensated fairly for his time. So why did it feel like he'd just lost something valuable? He pushed the thought aside and got back to work. Monday afternoon meant regular customers and routine repairs and the normal rhythm of his life. This was where he belonged, in grease-stained coveralls, fixing engines and solving problems he actually understood. But as he worked through the afternoon, his mind kept drifting back to a woman in a guest house preparing for battle, to evidence gathered in midnight office raids, to standing on a porch holding hands with someone who understood what it meant to fight for what mattered. And he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd made the wrong choice in walking away. 3 weeks passed, and Daniel fell back into the familiar rhythm of his life. The $20,000 sat in his bank account, transformed from abstract numbers into concrete possibilities. He paid off the garage's outstanding debts, fixed the leak in the roof, and set aside $15,000 for Emma's college fund. The remaining money went toward new diagnostic equipment he'd been eyeing for months. Emma noticed the changes, the way her father seemed less stressed about bills, the way he said yes more often to small things like ice cream after school or a new book she wanted. She didn't ask where the money came from, and Daniel didn't volunteer the information. Some stories were too complicated to explain to an 8-year-old. But despite the financial breathing room, despite the return to normalcy, Daniel found his thoughts drifting back to that weekend more often than he wanted to admit. He'd check the news occasionally, looking for updates about Langford Industries. He found a brief article about Richard Morrison's resignation and pending legal troubles, but nothing about Ivy herself. She'd disappeared back into her world of corporate leadership and family obligations, and Daniel had returned to his world of engine repairs and school pickups. It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt unfinished. "You've been distracted," Marco observed one Thursday evening as they closed up the garage together. "You keep checking your phone like you're waiting for something." "I'm not waiting for anything," Daniel said, which was technically true. He wasn't waiting for Ivy to call or text because he'd accepted that she wouldn't. Their arrangement had ended cleanly, professionally, with both parties getting what they needed from the transaction. "Right, and I'm the King of England." Marco leaned against the workbench, studying his friend. "This is about that woman, isn't it? The one who paid you to be her fake boyfriend for the weekend." "It's not about her." "Danny, I've known you since high school. I can tell when you're lying." Marco's voice softened. "What happened that weekend? Really happened, beyond the money and the party and whatever story you told me." Daniel was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "I helped her fight a battle, corporate espionage, fraud, someone trying to take her company. We gathered evidence together, and she won. And then we went back to our separate lives because that's what made sense. But you didn't want to go back to separate lives. What I wanted doesn't matter. She's got responsibilities. I've got Emma. We live in completely different worlds. Daniel tossed his shop rag into the laundry bin with more force than necessary. It was a weekend, Marco. A strange, intense weekend that's over now. Except you're still thinking about it 3 weeks later. I'm thinking about a lot of things. Doesn't mean I need to act on them. Marco was quiet for a moment, then pushed off the workbench. You know what your problem is? You're so focused on being practical and responsible that you forget you're allowed to want things for yourself. Not everything has to be about Emma or the garage or making the smart choice. When you're a single parent, everything is about making the smart choice. And sometimes the smart choice is being honest about what you want. Marco grabbed his jacket. Just think about it, okay? I'm heading out. Lock up when you're done. After Marco left, Daniel finished closing the garage alone, his friend's words echoing in his mind. What did he want? He wanted Emma to be happy and secure. He wanted his business to thrive. He wanted to stop feeling like something important had slipped through his fingers before he'd fully grasped what it was. He wanted to call Ivy and hear her voice and know that she was okay. But wanting something didn't make it practical or possible. So Daniel locked up the garage and drove home to his daughter and tried to convince himself that this hollow feeling would eventually fade. That same evening, across the city in a corner office overlooking Manhattan, Ivy Langford sat at her desk reviewing quarterly reports and trying to focus on the numbers in front of her. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of damage control and restructuring. Morrison's removal had left a power vacuum on the board, and Ivy had spent countless hours in meetings establishing new protocols, rebuilding trust, and proving that she could lead the company through crisis. She'd won. The company was secure, her position was stronger than ever, and the board had finally stopped questioning her competence. Everything she'd fought for that weekend had come to fruition exactly as she'd hoped. So why did victory feel so empty? You're still here, Sarah said from the doorway, her coat already on and her bag over her shoulder. It's past 8, Ms. Langford. You should go home. I will, just finishing these reports. Sarah stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. You've been staying late every night for 3 weeks. The crisis is over. Morrison is gone. You can breathe now. I'm breathing fine. Are you? Sarah moved closer, her expression concerned. Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone who won the war but lost something important in the process. Ivy set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. I'm fine, Sarah, just adjusting to the new normal. The new normal where you work 16-hour days and never mention the man who helped you save this company? Sarah's voice was gentle but pointed. I was there that Saturday night, remember? I saw how you talked about him. That wasn't just gratitude for a hired assistant. Daniel was exactly that. Someone I hired to help with a specific situation. The situation is resolved and we've both moved on. Have you? Because you've mentioned him at least once in every conversation we've had for the past 3 weeks. Usually something like, Daniel would find this amusing, or Daniel had an interesting perspective on that. Sarah sat down in the chair across from Ivy's desk. You miss him. Ivy wanted to deny it, but she'd built her relationship with Sarah on honesty and trust. It doesn't matter if I miss him. He has a life and a daughter and responsibilities that don't include navigating my complicated world. I paid him for his help, and he went home. That's how it was supposed to work. But that's not how it feels. No, Ivy admitted quietly. That's not how it feels. So call him, thank him again, ask him to dinner, do something other than sitting in this office pretending you don't care. Sarah stood and moved toward the door. You spent 6 months fighting Morrison because you refused to let him take what was yours. Why are you so willing to let Daniel go without a fight? After Sarah left, Ivy sat alone in her office, staring at her phone and thinking about a mechanic with honest eyes and a daughter he loved fiercely. She thought about standing on a porch in the darkness, holding hands with someone who understood what it meant to fight for what mattered. She thought about all the reasons calling him was a bad idea and all the reasons she wanted to do it anyway. Then she thought about her father, who taught her that worth wasn't about titles or wealth, but about integrity and courage, and being willing to take risks for things that mattered. She picked up her phone and found Daniel's number. her thumb hovering over the call button. Then she set the phone down, stood up, grabbed her coat, and made a decision. Some conversations needed to happen in person. 45 minutes later, Ivy's car pulled up in front of Brooks Auto Repair. The lights were off, the garage door closed, the security gate pulled down. Of course it was closed. It was past 9 on a Thursday night. Daniel would be home with Emma, having dinner or helping with homework or doing any of the 1,000 things single parents did in the evening hours. Ivy should have called first, should have planned this better, should have done literally anything other than drive across the city on impulse to a closed garage. She was about to put the car in reverse when she noticed a light in the small office window beside the main garage bay. Someone was still here. Ivy got out of her car and approached the office door, knocking firmly before she could talk herself out of it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and Daniel stood there in his familiar coveralls, grease on his hands and surprise clear on his face. "Ivy?" "Hi." She felt suddenly ridiculous, showing up unannounced in her business suit and heels. "I know it's late, and I should have called, but I was hoping we could talk." Daniel glanced back into the office, then stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "Is everything okay? Did something happen with Morrison or the board?" "No, everything's fine. The company is secure. Morrison is facing multiple felony charges, and the board has stopped questioning my leadership." Ivy took a breath. "I came because I needed to see you." "Why?" It was such a simple question, but Ivy found herself struggling to answer it. Why had she come? What did she expect to happen? What was she even asking for? "Because I can't stop thinking about that weekend," she said finally. "Because for 3 weeks, I've been trying to convince myself that what we did was purely transactional, that you were just someone I hired who happened to help me win an important battle. But it wasn't transactional, was it? Not really." Daniel was quiet, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the office window. "What are you saying, Ivy?" "I'm saying that I miss you. I miss talking to you and the way you cut through my complicated explanations to get to the truth. I miss the way you made me feel like I could be honest about struggling without it being used as evidence against me." Ivy wrapped her arms around herself against the cool evening air. "I'm saying I think I made a mistake when I let you walk away without fighting to keep you in my life. You paid me $20,000 to pretend to be your boyfriend for a weekend. We both knew what it was. Is that really all it was to you?" Daniel looked away, and Ivy could see him wrestling with the same question she'd been asking herself. "No," he admitted. "It wasn't just that. But Ivy, what are we doing here? You're a CEO who runs a multi-million-dollar company and navigates complex family dynamics and lives in a world I don't understand. I'm a mechanic with a daughter and a small business and barely enough time to keep my own life running smoothly. Different doesn't mean incompatible. You told me that yourself." "No," I said, "different doesn't mean incompatible when I was trying to justify why you might date someone like me as part of our cover story. This is real life, not a performance for your family." "Exactly. This is real life, which means we get to decide what we want without worrying about appearances or expectations." Ivy took a step closer. "I'm not asking you to upend your life or make promises you can't keep. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to have dinner with me. A real dinner, not a strategy session or a briefing before a family event. Just two people who might want to get to know each other better." Daniel studied her face in the dim light, and Ivy could see the moment he stopped fighting what he wanted. "Emma asks about you sometimes. She wants to know if you're my girlfriend now, and I keep telling her we're just friends." "What do you want to tell her?" "I want to tell her the truth, but I'm not sure what that is yet." Daniel's voice softened. "Dinner sounds good, Ivy. I'd like that. But I need you to understand something first. Emma comes first, always. If we do this, if we try to build something real, it has to work for her too. I wouldn't expect anything less. Your dedication to your daughter is one of the things I admire most about you." A small smile crossed Daniel's face. "You admire my dedication to my daughter?" "Among other things. You're honest, you're competent, you don't let people push you around, and you were willing to help a stranger fight a battle that wasn't yours because it was the right thing to do." Ivy returned his smile. "Those are all qualities worth admiring. You're also honest, competent, and willing to fight for what's yours. Plus, you make excellent pasta, and you stayed calm during one of the most stressful weekends imaginable." Daniel took a step closer, closing the distance between them. Those are also qualities worth admiring. They stood there in the dim light outside the garage, both of them smiling like idiots, both of them aware they were crossing a line from transaction into something real and uncertain and potentially wonderful. "So dinner," Ivy said. "When?" "Saturday night? I'll need to arrange childcare, but Marco owes me about 100 favors." "Saturday works. I'll pick you up at 7? Or I could pick you up. I do own a truck, even if it's not as fancy as your sedan." Like that, actually. Being picked up in a truck by a mechanic who isn't intimidated by my job title or my family name. Ivy's smile widened. It sounds refreshingly normal. Normal I can do. Though fair warning, I'll probably take you somewhere decidedly unfancy. My usual date spots don't include white tablecloths or wine lists. Good. I spend enough time in fancy restaurants trying to impress people. I'd rather go somewhere I can relax and just be myself. Daniel reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm despite the cool evening. "You can be yourself with me, Ivy. That's kind of the whole point." "I know. That's why I'm here." They stood together in the quiet evening, hands linked, both of them aware they were beginning something that would require courage and honesty, and a willingness to navigate the very real differences between their worlds. But they'd already proven they could work together through a crisis, already demonstrated they could trust each other with important things. Maybe that was enough foundation to build on. "I should let you get back to work," Ivy said eventually. "And I should get home before my security detail starts calling to make sure I wasn't kidnapped." "You have a security detail?" "3 of them, actually. They rotate shifts. I gave them the evening off because I didn't want them hovering while I had this conversation." Ivy squeezed his hand gently before releasing it. "Saturday at 7. Don't stand me up, Brooks." "Wouldn't dream of it, Langford." Ivy drove home feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She'd taken a risk, shown up unannounced and asked for what she wanted, and Daniel had said yes. It wasn't a guarantee of anything long-term, but it was a beginning, and sometimes that was enough. Saturday arrived with Emma full of questions about why her father was getting dressed up, and where he was going and whether his friend Ivy would be there. Daniel answered what he could and deflected the rest, trying to ignore Marco's knowing smirk from the couch. "You're nervous," Marco observed. "I haven't seen you this nervous about a date since senior prom." "That's because I haven't been on an actual date since senior prom. Everything with Michelle happened so fast there wasn't time for normal dating." Daniel checked his reflection one more time, wondering if the button-down shirt was too casual or the slacks too formal. "You look fine. Better than fine. You look like a guy who's about to pick up a beautiful, successful woman who inexplicably finds you charming." Marco stood and moved toward the door. "Em and I are going to the movies and then getting pizza. We'll be back by 10. Try to have fun and stop overthinking everything." After they left, Daniel stood alone in his apartment for a few minutes, gathering his courage. Then he grabbed his keys and drove to the address Ivy had texted him earlier, a brownstone in a quiet neighborhood that was nice without being ostentatious, the kind of place that suggested wealth but didn't scream it. Ivy answered the door wearing jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders and her feet bare. She looked younger like this, more relaxed, and Daniel felt some of his nervousness ease. "You look beautiful," he said. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Ivy grabbed a jacket from the coat rack. "Where are we going?" "There's a diner about 20 minutes from here. Best burgers in the city, according to Emma and me. Nothing fancy, but the food is good and the atmosphere is relaxed." "Sounds perfect." They drove to the diner, making easy conversation about their weeks, and Daniel was struck by how natural it felt. There was none of the performance anxiety from that weekend at the estate, no carefully constructed cover story to maintain, just 2 people talking about their lives and finding common ground in unexpected places. The diner was exactly what Daniel had promised: vinyl booths, checkered floors, a jukebox in the corner playing classic rock. They ordered burgers and fries and milkshakes, and Ivy laughed when Daniel insisted she try the chocolate shake with extra whipped cream. "I haven't had a milkshake in years," she admitted. "My nutritionist would have a heart attack if she could see me right now." "You have a nutritionist." "I have a lot of people who manage various aspects of my life. It's exhausting, honestly. Sometimes I just want to eat a burger without worrying about whether it fits my macro targets or whatever the current health trend is. Ivy took a long sip of her milkshake and smiled. This is delicious. Emma has excellent taste. She really does. Fair warning, though. If this becomes a regular thing, she's going to insist on joining us sometimes. She's very social, and she likes meeting new people. I'd like that. I enjoyed meeting her last time, even if it was brief. Ivy's expression grew more serious. Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Is Emma okay with you dating? I know single parents have to navigate complicated feelings around introducing new people into their children's lives. I've talked to her about it generally, explained that I might want to spend time with someone who's more than a friend, and asked how she'd feel about that. Daniel picked at his fries. She said as long as the person is nice and doesn't try to replace her mom, which, given that her mom abandoned her, is a pretty low bar, she's okay with it. But she also made me promise that she gets to meet anyone important before things get serious. That seems fair. She's protecting herself and making sure you're making good choices. She's 8 and already wiser than I am about relationships. Daniel smiled. What about your family? I assume they'll have opinions about you dating the mechanic for real. My family always has opinions, but after the board meeting, after I proved I could defend the company and outmaneuver Morrison, they've been more inclined to trust my judgment. Ivy met his eyes. And honestly, Daniel, I've spent my whole life managing my family's expectations and opinions. I'm tired of it. I want to make choices based on what makes me happy, not what makes them comfortable. And this makes you happy? Sitting in a diner eating burgers with a mechanic? This makes me happy. You make me happy. The fact that you're a mechanic just means you know how to fix things when they break, which is actually a very useful skill. Ivy reached across the table and took his hand. I'm not looking for someone to fit into my world, Daniel. I'm looking for someone who can help me build a new world that works for both of us. They finished their meal talking about everything and nothing. Emma's science fair project, the challenges of running a small business, Ivy's plans for restructuring the company's management team, Daniel's dream of maybe expanding the garage someday. It was easy and comfortable and felt like the beginning of something real. As they left the diner, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Emergency, need you home ASAP. Daniel's heart jumped into his throat. I need to get home. Marco says there's an emergency with Emma. They rushed to the car and Daniel drove faster than he should have, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. When they pulled up in front of his building, he practically ran to the apartment, Ivy close behind him. He burst through the door to find Marco and Emma sitting calmly on the couch watching a movie, both of them looking up in surprise. What's the emergency? Daniel demanded. Emergency? Marco looked confused. You texted me that there was an emergency and I needed to get home. Understanding dawned on Marco's face, followed quickly by guilt. Oh man, I'm sorry. I meant to text that Emma wanted you to bring home dessert. My phone must have autocorrected Emma wants dessert to emergency. I didn't mean to scare you. The adrenaline drained out of Daniel's system, leaving him shaky. You nearly gave me a heart attack, Marco. I'm really sorry, Danny. I swear it was just autocorrect. Marco noticed Ivy standing in the doorway. Hi, Ivy. Sorry for ruining your date with a false alarm. It's fine. I'm just glad everyone's okay. Ivy smiled at Emma. Hi, Emma. Remember me? You're my dad's friend, the pretty one. Emma bounced off the couch. Did you have fun on your date? Uncle Marco said you were on a date. We did have fun. Your dad took me to a diner with excellent milkshakes. Ivy crouched down to Emma's level. I hear you wanted dessert. What kind? Ice cream. But Dad didn't bring any home because of Uncle Marco's text. Well, we can't have that. What if I go to the store and get ice cream for everyone? Would that work? Emma's eyes lit up. Really? Really. Daniel, want to come with me? They left Marco babysitting and walked to the corner store, neither of them in any rush despite the ice cream mission. The evening was cool and clear, the city settling into its nighttime rhythm around them. Sorry about the panic, Daniel said. I'm usually better at staying calm, but when it comes to Emma, I tend to overreact. You're a good father. That means sometimes you panic about things that turn out to be fine. It's part of the job description. Ivy took his hand as they walked. She's wonderful, by the way, bright and curious and clearly adores you. The feeling is mutual. She's the best thing that ever happened to me, even if she did arrive under less than ideal circumstances. They bought ice cream and walked slowly back to the apartment, talking about the evening and making tentative plans for another date next weekend. When they reached Daniel's building, Ivy pulled him to a stop before they went inside. "Thank you for tonight, for taking me somewhere normal and treating me like a regular person instead of a CEO or a Langford or any of the other labels people usually attach to me." She rose up on her toes and kissed him gently. "I'd like to do this again. Often, if you're willing." "I'm willing," Daniel said, pulling her closer. "Very willing." They stood there on the sidewalk, kissing like teenagers and not caring who saw them, both of them grinning like idiots when they finally pulled apart. Inside the apartment, Emma pronounced the ice cream adventure a complete success and insisted that Ivy stay to have some with them. They all crowded into Daniel's small kitchen, eating ice cream straight from the containers and laughing at Marco's terrible jokes. And it felt right in a way Daniel hadn't experienced since before Michelle left. Later, after Ivy had gone home and Emma was in bed and Marco had left with more knowing smirks, Daniel sat alone in his living room thinking about how much his life had changed in the space of a month. He'd gone from barely making ends meet to having financial security. He'd gone from being completely alone in his parenting journey to having someone who wanted to be part of his life, complications and all. His phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. "Thank you for tonight. I can't remember the last time I had that much fun. Emma is delightful, by the way. You're raising an amazing human." Daniel typed back, "She liked you too. Says you're pretty and nice, and you bought good ice cream, which is basically her highest praise. Same time next week?" "Definitely. And Daniel, I'm glad you showed up at my garage that night. Best decision I've made in a long time." "Same. Get some sleep, Langford." "You too, Brooks." The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Daniel and Ivy saw each other when their schedules allowed, building a relationship that was real and messy and wonderful in all the ways their fake weekend romance hadn't been. Emma slowly got used to Ivy's presence, asking questions and testing boundaries, and eventually accepting that this person made her father happy and wasn't going anywhere. Ivy's family took longer to come around. Thomas remained skeptical about the relationship's longevity. Caroline made pointed comments about appropriate partnerships, and various cousins weighed in with unsolicited opinions. But Ivy had learned during the Morrison battle that other people's opinions mattered less than her own conviction, and she refused to let anyone else dictate her choices. 3 months after their first real date, Daniel and Ivy were having dinner at his apartment when Emma asked the question that had clearly been building for weeks. "Ivy, are you going to be my stepmom?" Ivy nearly choked on her water, and Daniel felt his face heat up. That's not... We haven't talked about... I'm just asking," Emma said with 8-year-old directness. "Because if you are, that would be okay with me. You're nice, and you make Dad happy, and you bring good snacks when you visit." Ivy composed herself and looked at Emma seriously. "I don't know if I'm going to be your stepmom. Your dad and I are still figuring out what we want our relationship to look like. But I can promise you this. Whether I end up being your stepmom or just someone who's important in your dad's life, I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me now." "Good," Emma said, satisfied. "Can I have more pasta?" After Emma went to bed, Daniel and Ivy sat on the couch together, and Daniel couldn't help laughing at the absurdity of having the step-parent conversation prompted by an 8-year-old. "Sorry about that. She's not exactly subtle. She's honest and direct and brave enough to ask questions that matter. I like that about her." Ivy turned to face him. "Though it does bring up a good point. We've been doing this for 3 months now. Where do you see this going?" Daniel thought about that question. He thought about the weekend that had started this whole thing, about evidence gathered in midnight office buildings and battles won through courage and preparation. He thought about burgers and diners and ice cream in his kitchen, and the way Ivy looked at Emma like she was genuinely interested in hearing about third-grade science projects. "I see this going wherever we want it to go," he said finally. "I see us figuring out how to blend our very different lives into something that works for both of us. I see you meeting me halfway between your world and mine, and me doing the same for you, and I see Emma being part of that because she's part of me, and anyone who wants to be with me has to accept that." "I do accept that. I want that. Ivy took his hand. I'm not going to pretend this is easy, Daniel. Our lives are complicated and our worlds are different, and there will be challenges we haven't even thought of yet, but I think we're worth fighting for. Do you? Daniel pulled her close and kissed her, pouring into it all the feelings he still wasn't quite ready to say out loud. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Yeah, he said, I think we're worth fighting for. 6 months after that conversation, Daniel closed his garage early on a Saturday afternoon and drove to Ivy's brownstone. She answered the door, already dressed for their plans, and they headed together to Emma's school for the science fair where his daughter was presenting her project on renewable energy. They stood in the crowded gymnasium watching Emma explain her solar panel experiment to a judge, and Daniel felt Ivy's hand slip into his. This was his life now: garage work and board meetings, parent-teacher conferences and corporate strategy sessions, Sunday brunches with Emma, and formal dinners with Ivy's family. It was complicated and messy and required constant negotiation and compromise. It was also the happiest he'd been in years. She's brilliant, Ivy whispered. She's going to change the world someday. She gets that from you, Daniel replied. The determination to fight for what she believes in, the courage to ask hard questions, the refusal to accept limitations. And from you, the integrity, the work ethic, the absolute certainty that doing the right thing matters more than taking the easy path. They watched Emma win second place in her category, beaming with pride, and afterward took her out for celebratory ice cream at the same diner where Daniel and Ivy had their first real date. Emma chattered excitedly about her project and the judge's questions and how she was definitely going to win first place next year. Later that evening, after Emma was in bed, Daniel and Ivy sat on his couch with cups of coffee, comfortable in the peaceful silence that came from being with someone who understood you. I've been thinking, Ivy said eventually, about the future, about what we're building here. And I think I want to make it official. Not marriage. We're not ready for that yet. And I know you need to move slowly for Emma's sake. But maybe moving in together, finding a place that works for all three of us, somewhere between your world and mine. Daniel set down his coffee and turned to face her. That's a big step. I know, but I'm ready for it if you are. I'm tired of splitting my time between my place and yours, tired of living out of overnight bags, tired of not having all of us in the same space. Ivy's voice was steady but vulnerable. I want to build a life with you, Daniel. A real life. Not just a series of scheduled dates when our calendars align, but only if you want that too. Daniel thought about what she was offering. A life together, a blended family, a future that combined his practical reality with her complicated wealth and obligations. It would be challenging and unconventional and would require both of them to make sacrifices and adjustments. It was also exactly what he wanted. Yeah, he said, let's do it. Let's find a place and build a life and figure out how to make this crazy thing work. Ivy's smile could have lit up the entire city. Really? Really? Fair warning, though, Emma gets veto power on the house. If she doesn't like it, we keep looking. That's only fair. This is her life, too. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about neighborhoods and space requirements, and how to navigate the logistics of combining their lives. It was practical and unromantic and absolutely perfect. A year after the weekend that changed everything, Daniel stood in the living room of the house they'd found together. A comfortable place in a good neighborhood with a yard for Emma and enough space for Ivy's home office and close enough to Daniel's garage that his commute was manageable. Emma was at a sleepover, and Ivy had taken the evening off from the constant demands of running her company. They were hosting a small dinner party, Marco and his girlfriend, Sarah, and her husband, Victoria and Robert. It was an eclectic mix of people from their different worlds, but somehow it worked. Sarah was talking to Marco about basketball. Victoria was showing Robert something on her phone. Everyone was laughing and comfortable and enjoying themselves. Ivy found Daniel in the kitchen, ostensibly refilling drinks, but really just taking a moment to breathe. You okay? She asked. Yeah, just thinking about how different my life is now compared to a year ago. Good different or scary different? Good different. Definitely good different. Daniel pulled her into his arms. A year ago, I was a struggling single father barely making ends meet, and you were a stranger who walked into my garage asking me to do something crazy. Now we're here, in our house, hosting a dinner party with people from both our worlds. And you're not struggling anymore. The garage is thriving, Emma's in a great school, and you don't have to choose between paying bills and giving your daughter what she needs. That's all because of you, the money you paid me, the connections you helped me make, the stability you brought into our lives. Ivy shook her head. That's because of us. You fought for me when I needed help, and I'm fighting for you now. That's what partners do. From the living room, they heard Emma's voice. She'd apparently come home early from her sleepover. Dad, Ivy, where are you? They emerged from the kitchen to find Emma standing in the living room looking pleased with herself, holding something behind her back. What are you doing home, kiddo? I thought you were staying at Madison's tonight. I was, but her mom brought me back because I forgot my sleeping bag, and I wanted to show you something. Emma pulled out a piece of paper from behind her back. I made this at Madison's house. It's for both of you. She handed them a drawing, crude in the way of 8-year-old art, but unmistakably showing 3 figures labeled Dad, Ivy, and me standing in front of a house. Above them, in careful block letters, Emma had written, My family. Daniel felt his throat tighten. Ivy's hand found his and squeezed hard. Do you like it? Emma asked anxiously. I wanted to make sure Ivy knows she's part of our family now, because she is, right? Yeah, kiddo, Daniel managed. She's definitely part of our family now. Good. Emma seemed satisfied. Can I go show Uncle Marco? She ran off toward the living room, leaving Daniel and Ivy standing together staring at the drawing. She drew us as a family, Ivy said softly. She did. I'm part of your family. You are. Ivy turned to face him, and Daniel saw tears in her eyes that matched the ones he was trying to blink away. A year ago, I was alone and desperate and willing to hire a stranger to help me survive a weekend with my judgmental family. And now I have this. A partner who knows me, a child who accepts me, a home that feels real. A year ago, I was exhausted and broke and convinced I'd be alone forever because who wants to date a single father with trust issues? Daniel pulled her closer. And now I have you. Have us. Have a life I didn't think was possible. They stood there in their kitchen, holding each other and marveling at how far they'd come from that first improbable meeting. In the living room, their friends were laughing and Emma was showing off her drawing and everything felt exactly right. I love you, Ivy said quietly. I should have told you sooner, but I was scared, and I didn't want to push too hard. But I love you, Daniel Brooks. I love you, and I love the life we're building, and I love that your daughter drew me as part of your family. I love you too, Ivy Langford. Have since about week 2, if I'm being honest. Just took me a while to admit it. Daniel kissed her forehead. Thank you for walking into my garage that night. Thank you for asking me to do something crazy. Thank you for being brave enough to fight for what you wanted. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for helping me when you didn't have to. Thank you for showing me what partnership really looks like. From the living room, Marco's voice called out, Are you two making out in the kitchen again? Because Emma is trying to show me her drawing, and she shouldn't have to witness her parents being gross. They laughed and separated, heading back to join their friends and Emma and the life they'd built together from one improbable weekend and a willingness to take risks on something that mattered. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected. It was better. Because sometimes the best stories start with a stranger walking through your door asking you to do something crazy. And sometimes if you're brave enough to say yes, you end up finding exactly what you didn't know you were looking for. Daniel Brooks, the mechanic who fixed broken engines and raised his daughter with fierce devotion, had said yes to a desperate stranger and found a partner worth fighting for. Ivy Langford, the CEO who fought corporate battles and navigated impossible family dynamics, had taken a chance on someone outside her world and found a home worth coming back to. And together, they'd built something neither of them could have created alone. A family forged not from obligation or expectation, but from choice and courage and love. The garage still needed running, and the company still demanded attention, and Emma still had science fairs and homework and all the complications of growing up. But they faced it together now, partners in every sense that mattered, building a life that honored both their worlds while creating something entirely new. It was messy and complicated and required constant work. It was also absolutely perfect.